she gives a lot of herself to the town. So I'll leave this here in case you need to.
Oh, I appreciate that.
Yep. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to night 2 of our FY 2022 budget hearing. I think we're jumping right off with IT. Is that correct?
That is correct. So most of the crew behind me is from the Public Works Department, but somewhere back there is Colby Cousins, our IT director. And I'll provide a high-level overview of the IT budget. Colby will be happy to answer any follow-up questions you may have, and we'll talk briefly to the tech warrant as well tonight while he's here. Overall, the IT budget, salary and wages are up 6.3%. A portion of that, as we discussed last night, is related to the 53rd pay period. Part of that is also driven this year by the fact that there were several steps that employees in the department were due last year that were not awarded, and so we need to catch up per the contract with those, so that inflates the increase here slightly. On the operating side in the budget, you'll note the largest increase is in telephone, and that is not a coincidence. We have been slowly moving telephone costs from various departments into the IT budget in the last few years, so the reductions won't stand out, but in other budgets there are either reductions or level funding of phone to reflect the fact that we're consolidating some of those costs in this budget. It's a level service budget. The IT department supports all of our town divisions, the utilities, electric. They support the library to an extent. They work very closely with the schools. We actually support the back-end infrastructure for the schools, and the school IT department supports its programs and front-facing curriculum-based technology. So with that, be happy to take any questions.
Ted?
No questions.
Mike?
Nothing.
Paul?
All set.
Mike?
No questions.
Eric?
Just one question. I don't know how to frame it right. The telephone consolidation, is that also upgrades to modern? Are you doing voice over IP or?
So that's also happening, but this is mostly making sure that the bills are all flowing through the one department so we can kind of keep track of lines, expenses, et cetera. But there's, and we'll talk later tonight about a phone, I think tonight or next time, about the phone, that's during warrant tonight. Okay. We'll be talking tonight about school phone system.
Okay,
And party
thank you.
upgrade there, thanks.
Thank you.
Sally?
Thank you. I see that one of the accomplishments for fiscal 2021 is fiber optic link between Danvers, Wenham, Hamilton, Essex. Can you explain what that is?
So, yes, and I may invite Colby to amble up to the microphone while I start to explain it, but several years ago, the town meeting supported a series of appropriations so that we could move away from copper, which was being phased out and no longer supported by telecom, onto a fiber network that we developed and built within the town of Danvers, connecting all of our town buildings, school buildings, utility sites, towers, et cetera, kind of on a spoken wheel model. At the same time, we were pursuing grants and partnering with some of the North Shore towns to try to establish direct fiber links to their communities in pursuit of a regional model and approach to IT, and we actually have one contract in place with Essex where we support their back end and they provide some revenue to the town. And Colby has been working very closely with the MAPC on a strategic plan to expand that regional footprint. And Colby, I don't know if you want to share a few thoughts with the community.
Yeah, you covered it pretty well, Steve. Thank you. But yeah, we've been moving into area communities. We have an MOU on the table right now, hoping 5 or 6 communities will sign, and the idea being that we run fiber into those neighboring communities and can connect them back to our data center and operate a regional data center hosting servers for the region.
So I remember over the years is the switch over to the fiber optic, and I'm just wondering if you could, it's probably something we've asked in the past, sorry to ask again, but besides a revenue source with the other communities, is there a benefit that we're all together on this system?
Yeah, there's a cost reduction, so by pooling our resources, we realize economies of scale, and there's a cost reduction associated with hosting this infrastructure and equipment in a central location.
What about stuff like safety issues region-wide, where you'd need cooperation back and forth between towns for natural disasters, fires, police matter? Does this fit in with anything that would be helpful there?
Yes, it could be helpful there. In fact, we're talking about connecting some of the communities to the Regional 911 Center over in Middleton as well, and providing some redundancy through our infrastructure for that project. And then just basically the ability to communicate effectively and efficiently between all of these communities, I think improves opportunities for improvements in public safety and communication and that type of stuff.
Well, thank you very much. That's all
Thank
I
you.
had.
Thanks,
Yeah.
Sally.
And I would just offer one quick point of clarification. When we talk about expanding fiber in other communities, town of Danvers is paying only for fiber in the town of Danvers. Other communities are funding it through their own town meetings or through grants and the like. So Colby's providing some strategic leadership, but they're responsible for building their own infrastructure. And then in the case of Essex, they pay us an annual fee to host their virtual servers in our data center, which was designed with this in mind. So.
Thank you.
Paul?
Just a clarification, so there is some potential for revenue?
Yeah, Colby just referenced an MOU that came out of the work we're doing with the MAPC, and the concept here is that, because of the complexity of our electric department, our school environment, our library, the police dispatch center, we have a fairly robust IT department. We have some neighboring communities whose IT department is literally a consultant who lives in Arizona and will remote in to try to fix things. So the idea is that these smaller communities can sign an MOU where they would pay in an annual fee essentially to have access on occasion to get questions answered by one of our IT employees when they're in between what the projects they're working on. It brings a little revenue in to offset our IT costs and gives them access to some municipal expertise, so they're not relying on consultants and outside vendors to tell them what they need and where they should be investing. So it's worked out very well, and the MAPC's played a very central role in bringing everybody together.
Is that currently in effect with Essex now?
Essex is the first, yep, and we have some other communities on the North Shore who are very interested in participating.
Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggan, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. A question for Colby through you, Mr. Chairman, concerning the data center that the town manager just referenced. I believe that's still on Borough Street?
That's correct, yep.
Okay, and are we storing our backup data at that same location?
No, we have a disaster recovery site at the high school, and we store
Right.
our backups off-site there.
Okay.
We replicate our backups
Yeah,
off-site
that's-
there.
All right, thanks for refreshing my memory. And just one other question about ransomware. So we see continual impacts to small communities like ours throughout the country where they're infected by ransomware, which basically or essentially locks out all the files that we have in the data center, and we have to pay hundreds of thousands of, well, not us, but these communities have to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars to retrieve that data. What steps are we taking to protect ourselves from that type of impact?
So there's no complete protection, but there are many steps you can take to be much more protected than without taking those steps. So our approach is a security fabric approach. We have layered security that's interwoven together to create a strong defense. We have intrusion detection systems on top of firewalls, on top of antivirus that are all integrated together. They're made by one manufacturer, so they integrate very tightly. We also do nightly backups of all of our critical data and store those off-site. And we are in the second year now of a cybersecurity training program for our users, a grant-funded cybersecurity training program for our users. User education is one of the best defenses you can have against these type of ransomware attacks, because a lot of the time they're targeted attacks that can slip past the cybersecurity measures you have in place. So I value that user education greatly, and we're seeing the results of it. Users are picking up on malicious emails and sending them to the IT department for clarification, and that's been working well.
All right, that's great. Sounds like you're being very proactive. Just a brief analogy. My company likes to send out trick emails every once in a while with a link in them, and then if you click on that link, you have to go to remedial training. So
That's part of the training we're doing, the grant-funded training.
all right, that's great.
As well.
Thank you very much for the update. Thank you.
Matt, thanks for the idea. We may use that.
Bill?
Bill Bradstreet, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. I don't know if this is the correct time or point in the program, but I'm disappointed that the technology isn't available. We had a problem last night with the town manager's mic. I don't know why, with what we have for equipment, that should have happened. The other thing is an observation. The way this is set up tonight, you literally have to duct tape the wiring to the floor. Isn't there a better system that we either should have had or can have now? Please, just tell me you're working on it.
Well, I'm going to say we're not working on it. This building was not built with the, this space in particular was not designed for the use that we're currently using it for. I think David Lane behind me would be happy to get quotes. This would be an expensive project. We could have this room whipped into shape for cutting-edge interactive technology presentations, Bill, but we have other places to do that when we're out of the pandemic, so we're not going to work on that one anytime soon.
But you are working.
We're working on a lot of other stuff.
Mark?
Information technology. If I may suggest to the Finance Committee members, you speak directly to the mic, you'll be heard. Otherwise, the audience on television will not hear you. One of the questions that I raised at the Selectmen's review was in the, maybe it's not information, but the telephones that are going to be replaced. Do we have a cost benefit of replacing those phones? And really what we're doing is we're conglomerating everything into one location that we can monitor what's going on. Isn't that correct?
So yeah, just a little background on the phone system at the high school. The core of that phone system was put in 7 years ago, and we've added to it over time. So you may remember some warrant articles in more recent times addressing the school phone system. Those were additions to the existing system when we added buildings on and expanded the system. The core components of the system now are 7 years old, and they're end of life per the manufacturer's specifications. That's not to say that all of the components of the phone system are end of life, and we don't have to replace all of the phone components, just the core components. The phones themselves will stay. The phones are good. The software licensing is good. We're licensed for another 3 years still on the licensing. And the proposed solution here will provide us 5 years of manufacturer support as well. So that will extend, this cost will cover us for 5 years, a 5-year solution. And then we'll have to start looking at annual payments again.
My question is more of the cost benefit. How much is it going to cost us to replace all of this? And what benefit do we gain from it by reductions in other areas that are going to be affected?
Well, I believe it's a requirement in the schools that you have phones in each classroom and the ability to dial 911. I'm not sure if you can have, I don't think you can have school if you don't have that system in place. So we're concerned with the core equipment becoming end of life, that we won't be able to get support on it if it malfunctions at all. And the concern being that phones will be down and we won't be able to hold classes if we don't have phones.
I understand that, but the thing is that we need to start looking at what is it costing us. We have cell phones with the teachers that we were talking about last night, and 911 works from the cell phone as well as from the wall phone. Most of the hardline phones are eliminated. I don't know if anybody has one in their home anymore. But I'm just wondering, there has to be a reason, and that's one of the reasons, is for the safety and efficiency of the classroom. But at what cost? Are we paying through the nose for this installation instead of using Verizon or Comcast or whatever other system that has been used in the past?
So if I could jump in for a second, I mean, part of the reason we're using the phone systems we're using now is that the telecoms have phased out copper wire. So we're putting in a system, it's been vetted by the schools and by the IT department. It's a cost-effective system. It's going to satisfy the requirements Colby's describing. We don't issue cell phones to all teachers. We don't have 500 cell phones in circulation on the school side, so it's a requirement. It's been well thought out. And as the IT director indicated, it'll get us another 5 years before we're back to looking at having to start replacing pieces again.
But the new phones are basically internet-type phones.
And I don't think that all of the, I think if I heard Colby correctly, not all of the handsets necessarily being replaced. This is the system that's being replaced. It is voice over internet, so it allows for more than just phone calls. You could be direct dialing and forwarding messages and all the things that modern phone systems do.
Okay. The reason I'm asking this question, and I raised this before, is that every year we have a significant amount for whether it's phones or internet or the fiber optics. And one of the questions that I had about the fiber optics is who actually installs the fiber optic cables that we use? And they have to be dead-ended at a server and, on the other end, that goes through the fiber optics. Who actually installs them, and what has been the cost to date? Because we seem to be talking about adding more and more and more. And one of the questions tonight was, how efficient is that, and are we going to make any money off of this?
So can I just jump in? They're completely different systems we're talking about. The fiber network that was mentioned by Sally, that's connecting all the town buildings, the utility sites. We're able to monitor wells and substations and do municipal work and have the back-end software that we use municipally transmit in and out. Telephone system is a separate, it connects into the broader fiber network, but the phone system within the school is separate from the fiber network that Sally Kilden was referencing.
But isn't the basis of the telephone system also through the fiber optics?
Yes, data. Yes. All data is traveling over fiber at this point. Yeah.
Right. So that's why I'm just, I'm watching every year at town meeting, and we look at it, and some of the questions have been raised here tonight by the board. But I'm just concerned that maybe we're getting into a business that we decided not to go into back when we had the cable issues with the cable companies. So are we in business on fiber optics now, or?
Not to belabor it, but we actually own the fiber, so we were paying for space on the copper that was owned by the telecom, so we paid them to use it, we paid them to service it. We own the fiber. We do have some contracts in place for disaster recovery if we have a break, if there's a tree fall, but we own the asset. So we're not paying annually on the asset. We pay a service contract to make sure that if there's a break that we can get it fixed within an appropriate amount of time.
All I'm looking for is a return on investment. That's the only thing, and I don't seem to hear it. So thank you.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
Move the budget.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Next, we'll pivot into the Public Works.
Were we going to talk about the,
Actually, yeah. Do you want to switch to the tech warrant so that Colby can? that we can get in. Thank you.
Thank you. The tech warrant.
So this
Welcome
is-
back, Colby.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is the FY22 technology plan. The total request is $250,000. That's made up of general government, Danvers Public Schools, and Peabody Institute Library. The general government request is $137,000. That covers Office 365 licensing, server support, senior center phone system, and social media archiving. School request is $100,000. That covers interactive display boards, switching infrastructure, high school auditorium projector, and desktop replacements. The library is $13,000. That covers software licensing, desktop and printer replacements, technical supplies, and laptops and tablets. It's a total of $250,000. If there are any questions, I'll take.
Sally, any questions?
Thank you. I have none, thanks. It's spelled out very nicely here. Thank you.
Eric?
One question. Could you just summarize the procurement process? I know we have someone there, but just, that would help to understand how this all gets done efficiently.
I should probably take one step back from that, since this is your first time through this, is to say that the technology plan is it's a standing warrant article each year where we pay for one-time investments in infrastructure. So a lot of the IT operating costs are covered through the school IT budget or the town IT budget. But when we come to large ticket items, we generally budget those separately for a couple of reasons. One, it's a project-based budget, so if we have cost savings in one area and we need to reallocate a couple of dollars to cover something that's slightly over in another, we have the flexibility there. It also allows us to isolate and talk about these investments instead of just having them buried in the operating budget. And I could defer to Colby. There are a variety of procurement techniques. We have state contract lists. We have joint purchasing power through some of the school procurement avenues. Some of these we would do our own procurement process, but I don't know if you want to elaborate on that at all, Colby.
Yeah, sometimes we do lease purchase through this tech warrant fund. And then everything Steve mentioned there as well.
I suspected as much, but I wanted to ask.
And I think this is one of the, in a lot of areas, the price to buy 3 of something isn't necessarily much better than buying 4, but when it comes to core switches and some of the IT expenses, you really start to see the economies scale up, which is part of the reason as well we're working with some of these other towns and cities as well as the school department is. We get a lot more bang for our buck when we're doing those purchases collaboratively.
Yeah, the larger a one-time purchase we can make, the more we can drive our unit costs down and realize savings there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Mike?
No questions.
Paul?
I feel comfortable with this figure. I think it was the same last year, if I'm not mistaken.
I think it was 350,000 last year, so it's down a little bit.
It's down. It's even better. No, I feel comfortable with all the items. No questions. Thank you.
No, nothing.
Ted?
Just one general comment. I feel comfortable with the number 2, but it might help to try and elaborate a little bit in the line items where you can quantify the number of units that you're replacing, just to give a gauge for unit costs and things like that. But generally speaking, I'm pretty comfortable with what's social media archiving.
That's for all the town's official social media. We archive all of that for public record, so we have a copy of it. Because on certain social media platforms, it will only stay, so many messages will stay or only stay for a certain length of time. So we want to capture all of that and make sure we're abiding by the public records law. So we use a service to do that for us.
Okay. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you.
Any questions from the audience? And obviously, We'll be discussing the article itself on the 26th. And this might just be a good time to point out that with the tech warrant, with some of the issues associated with DPW warrant articles, with Essex Tech coming before us, if you have questions for anyone in particular, if you want to get them to a particular person who might not be here that night or might need to do research on those questions, you might want to forward them on to the town manager so he can get them to the appropriate person beforehand, just as a thought before we move on to warrant articles in a couple of weeks.
And just to clarify, the hope or the intent was to have the experts here tonight if there were questions about some of these things. If there are questions that come up after the fact, obviously, if you can get those to us, we can get those answered. But the plan wouldn't be to have everybody here for the warrant itself. Thanks.
CR, do we need to vote on this?
No, we'll vote on it with the warrant article.
Steve, do you want to look at the school phone system while we're...
Yeah, do you want to quickly go to that one as well?
So the school phone system we talked about a little bit. It's 7 years old. The core components are 7 years old. Costs $150,000 to replace them. The phone handsets are good. We don't have to replace those. The software licensing is good for another 3 years. And this solution includes 5 years of manufacturer support. The cost is $150,000. Any questions?
Any questions?
Just, in the book, it says $100,000 is going to be on the article. You're changing it to 175?
150, school phone system replacement.
I think the issue, Mike, I think you're looking at, are you on page 98 in your budget book?
Yes.
So if you look down to the second blue bar, I'm sorry, the first blue bar, the school phone system replacement is a standalone article that town meeting will vote.
And then John George, 25. And then
Okay.
add up to the 175.
Okay. Not to show my age, but I don't know if it's the light or not, or I'm in the rear end of the plane here. Can't quite make those figures. I can just barely get those figures, but some of the other graphs that you could put up there, I can't quite get them. I don't know if you can turn a light off or something, because
Could try that.
I can't quite
I
make
think the
them
box is slightly smaller tonight,
Where's Matt?
just a little.
Matt's going to play with the dial while I turn off the lights. This is how IT is done. Question about the microphone. You're supposed to bang it, turn it off and on, shake it, blow on it.
All those things is adjusted in the car.
That's smaller.
Yeah, I know.
That's better.
Say two.
Very well.
Thank you. I was ready to see my optometrist.
So can we get some wine now, too?
That's right.
I heard, as I walked down, I heard candles, mood light, wine.
A little mood music would be nice.
Pete, did you take it? Would you guys like to take a journey into the world of public works?
Well, let's do it.
Okay. So as has been the theme, I'll provide a pretty high-level overview, and I'm sure there will be some questions. David Lane is joined by the entire DPW team, and we will be happy to answer any questions that you have as we go. So we start with Public Works tax supported. I think as everybody knows, we have the water and sewer utility, we have the electric utility, and then we have the divisions covered under the Public Works tax. We have streets, buildings, forestry and grounds, equipment, and engineering. Thank you guys. From the engineers in the back, I apologize. So this is the roll-up, similar to the way that we do the land use and community services budget. We have the roll-up here for the public works tax. The big drivers here, as you can see on the screen, as we discussed a little bit last night, we do budget our snow and ice expenses on a rolling basis. When we have a winter like the one we talked about last night, we might cheat that down a little bit. If we have an unseasonably mild winter, we're not going to drop the average inappropriately low, but it does get adjusted from time to time. And based on recent trend, the snow and ice combined budget is down $140,000 this year. I know there's some questions tonight about trash. We have a 3% increase in the budget per our contract for refuse collection and disposal, and then a modest increase dollar-wise, but a large increase percent-wise for pavement striping in the tax-supported budget this year. So I think I'll stop there, and I'm certain there are some questions, so we'll be happy to answer those.
Ted?
How many years do you guys use for the snow and ice?
5?
5, so you just kind of roll, so the 5-year average went down, that's just, okay, that's fine. The second question, I think, I know Mike brought it up yesterday, on the trash, so if I'm looking at this right, the $40,000 increase is 3%, which would make our total trash expenses $1.33 million-ish every year. Is that the total we pay for trash disposal for the whole town?
I think it's a combination of.
So you'll see in the budget, we have the line items for the refuse collection, right around 900,000. Then there's one for recycling collection, right around 300.
Yep.
So it's like, 1.2 for the collection. Then there's the disposal number. So our collection contract right now has the 3% increase in it. The way our 10-year contract was set up, every other year we got a bump. It was 3%, then 0, 3%, 0. Next year will be 0 on that. On the disposal, right now we've got 2.5% on our disposal. That's tied to a cost of living index that we're negotiating with Covanta right now on that. We haven't got our final letter, but we have 2.5% as a placeholder for our tipping fee to go up.
Okay.
So altogether, yeah, we're looking at around a $2 million budget altogether.
And you guys have been pretty transparent about the deal we have relative to current market pricing. What kind of uptick are we looking at if market prices stay the same?
So we're watching a couple of our area towns
Yep.
very closely because they're going through the bid process right now, see how they do. But I would say it's a real crystal ball thing. The vendor's telling me 20 to 25%, but I think we're looking at probably a 10% increase without making any big changes. A lot of that's going to be dependent on the recycling markets. If the recycling markets flip around in the next 2 years, we'll be in a lot better shape.
Okay.
So there's going to be a lot of moving parts and pieces. Right now, we're set up where the vendor owns the recycling. He takes the risk or the reward. We set it up like that 20 years ago. It's worked out for us so far. We ran it back 20 years, the numbers. And as far as doing the business of the town, it's been the guidance so far that we don't want to be in the risk business with recycling. We'd rather get one fixed price and let the vendor take the risk. Get a good deal and let the vendor take the risk.
And are there other types of behavioral changes with trash in town that could be pursued to mitigate some of the cost?
Sure. Last time, when we did it was actually 15 years ago, we really had to change the system. At that time, we went from 5 barrels down to 3.
Yep.
We implemented the bulky item sticker program. You used to be able to get a bulky item. Then we also went to mandatory recycling. So that was a big thing, going to 3 barrels or bags and mandatory recycling. We'll have to look at things like that again. More rigid mandatory recycling. Do you go from 3 barrels to 2 barrels? We'll have to look at all the options.
Okay. That's really it for me. Thank you.
Mike?
So Dave, is it plausible that we're going to get to a point in 2 years where we are going to have to take the risk on are we secure that there are going to be people out there because the recycling business has basically fallen dead, and that we might not be able to find people in 2 years who are willing to take on that responsibility for us?
If we were going to go out to bid today, I believe we'd have to go out as an alternate, where you do it, so we'd have to get a real facts and figures on what it's going to cost us to take that risk, and then do an evaluation on that. if the market's, and that's because the markets are so volatile right now. I think the contractor would put a big number in to pay for recycling, and he may be able to make money off it, or he or she, 5 years from now. So right now, I think we'd have to do it as an alternate and do a financial analysis on it. In 2 years, they could stabilize, and we could see better things in the market, and we may be able to lock it in like we do right now.
So that was actually, was my question was, is it, in the conversations that I've had with people in the rubbish business, their indication is that we have, in essence, the best contract of anybody around. And the expectation is that we're going to take it on the chin in 2 years pretty hard when we have to actually negotiate that. One of the guys actually said to me, and it might have been him trying to get business, but he actually raised the idea that we might be better off trying to go out to bid now and not take the risk in 2 years. Is there any possibility that there'd be, I mean, I know we have a great contract, and clearly, common thinking would be, well, we're not going to waste those 2 years of a great contract, but is it plausible that we could find ourselves in this market in 2 years where we're so much worse that we would have been better off locking in today?
Oh, we need to keep a close eye on, exactly, over the next 2 years, keep a close eye on when we're going to put this out for proposals or for bids. That's what we want to see, what a couple area towns get for pricing and what they get for numbers, what they get for competition. If we get some other vendors that are competing, if we get another vendor that comes into the system that could take a town like the size of Danvers, that might be the time to jump in, because it's two different things. It's markets, and it's also what contractors are interested in doing the work for us.
Yeah, I think right now we basically have got the one that we've got, and they're the only one that's
Yeah,
in the
we've had
game.
one for 20 years. We had a different one for the 15 years before that. So we've had long-term relationships. In this one, we were able to work this out in a long-term deal. Everything worked out great.
I mean, I haven't hid my concern that this is an area going forward over the course of the next 2 years that could become a huge problem for us. And I know you said 10, 25. I mean, literally, I've been told this is a number that could conceivably double in 2 years, and that we could be in a position, double in 5 years, but that we could be in a position in 5 years where we're paying close to $2 million for this. Where are we in terms of our long-term budget concerns with that? Can we handle that type of an increase in our budget without some type of additional revenue for this?
The short answer is no. I mean, our levy capacity right now, when our levy goes up at a rate of 2.5%, it's roughly $2 million in new revenue. So if we saw a doubling of a trash and recycling at, on top of pension, on top of Essex Tech, on top of the other things, it would be unsustainable, to put it bluntly. And it's also similar to the discussion last night about OPEB. I mean, it seems like it was 10 years ago, but the recycling market was literally one of the 3 top priorities for the Mass Municipal Association 15 months ago. On a call with MAPC today, we started talking about it again. The pandemic kind of pushed everything else to the side, but the collapse of the recycling market was one of the pressing issues facing the Commonwealth a year ago, because we had a lot of towns out west who did the math and said, forget it, we're just going to throw all of our recycling in the landfill because it's cheaper than it is to recycle at this point. So it's naive to sit back and think that something's magically going to happen in the next 2 years, which is why David is talking about we're monitoring what's happening right now in the market. We want to see what our options may be between now and then, but we would have a big problem in our hands if our cost doubled in 2 years, to your point.
I mean, what are the, I mean, I know we looked at it years ago, but how do other communities, are we an anomaly in regard to the fact that basically our citizens get free rubbish pickup and removal?
Well, it's not free. I mean, it's...
Well, you don't pay an extra amount. We're not buying bags. We're not buying,
Yeah, I think, I mean, if I understand the
stickers,
question, there are two,
stickers.
I think Ted asked the question about behavioral changes. So when the cost is buried in the tax levy, people don't know what the cost is for trash unless they're sitting at a finance committee meeting and listening to us talk. Some communities do a tip, when I lived in Connecticut, we paid directly, the trash fee was outside of the municipal budget. You paid directly for it, you understood the cost of hauling. So that's the extreme model, but now you're just taking the existing costs and covering them in the levy versus a direct fee. As David mentioned, we could limit the number of cans. Some places charge per bag outside. The first can is free, the second can is $5. That gets people to think about the cost of trash. So it's, how do you pay for it? What's the revenue stream that's used to pay for it? And then secondarily, are there techniques that can be used to modify people's behavior, assuming that the market supports that? If the recycling market's upside down, incentivizing people to recycle more isn't necessarily going to drive the cost down, because the haulers know that it's more expensive to handle recycling than it is trash at that point. So,
Can I make if there's any article, if I want to nerd out on this and understand why the recycling market's upside down, feel free to pass it on.
we'll look around, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, there's actually, Frontline did one which sort of explains the overall process with it. It's an I mean, I know some people don't care much for Frontline, but, and in essence, what they will tell you is that virtually nothing that we quote-unquote recycle actually gets recycled. That everything is, in essence, moved either to landfills and just thrown away as landfills. The majority of it is sent to Asia. And then what's happened is that the Asian market has, in essence, said, we will not take that recycling anymore, and especially large parts of China. And so now we're stuck with the reality, and my understanding is, again, from what I've talked to people in this business, we may think that when we put stuff in that blue bin and other stuff in our bags, that somehow we've done a great thing. Most of that all ends up together anyways in a landfill someplace, and that we really aren't recycling, so to speak, from that standpoint. And it all ends up together. That's how that's how their business works at this point. So.
That's inspiring. Thank
Yes.
So the trash tip fee in the ballpark of $70-some odd is artificially low because recycling was being shipped to Asia for many, many years and well below the cost to actually treat, separate, and deal with. There was a really very cool term. It was a national policy in China, and it had a snazzy term. I cannot remember the term off the top of my head, but it was in the press a couple years ago. But we'll look around. We'll find something that summarizes the situation this year.
So basically, they told us they were taking it to recycle it, and they were not recycling it, and now they're tired of the trash piles that they bought from us, basically. Yeah.
Trash. Right.
Okay.
Anything else, Mike?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Okay, Paul?
Oh, I appreciate the uplifting conversation. And I did see the front lines, and it's depressing. I think Ted and Mike have done a good job addressing it, and David's done a good job addressing it. I'll just move on with one other question. Well, I guess JMR are present vendor.
Correct.
They're handling both the trash and the recycling.
Correct.
Correct, yeah, okay, so they're the company we're dealing with. But moving away from that, just one winter chemicals is mentioned in there as a line item, and are we using best practices as far as trying to be environment friendly with the chemicals that we use on the roads in the wintertime? I know sand is sand, I assume. I don't believe there's anything else in the sand but sand, is that correct?
Sure. Mostly is...
Beyond that.
Yeah, mostly is sodium chloride. Most of our products is salt. We do treat it with some other chemicals, but we absolutely use best management practices. The select board have directed us to do that. We do it with calibration of the trucks so that we only put out the amount of salt or magnesium chloride that's absolutely necessary.
Right.
No more, no less. And that's changed from how it was years ago.
When
The
did
trucks
we-
regulate how much it goes out right with the speed of the truck.
Right, approximately when did we change to this specific
So we
practice?
finally got the last truck over to speed control probably 4 years ago.
Do we have any areas in town that are definitely no salt areas? I never seen a sign around town, but are there some?
We don't have any of those in
Are they
town.
needed at all, or are we just all right with what we're doing at this point?
Usually those are around drinking water reservoirs,
Yes.
mostly, or really sensitive environmental areas where the salt would get right in and affect it. The area that we salt around the Putnamville Reservoir is downstream of the reservoir, so we don't really have to worry about that. And at this time, working with the Conservation Commission, there isn't any other areas right now that we have been cautioned on or that we need to look at. It may
Ipswich-
change in the future, but right now, we don't have any of those.
Ipswich River is not an area that we would be necessarily be concerned with, the basin?
Yeah, we don't salt many roads that would flow into the river. It all goes across land, so the water would be treated before it gets there.
Because I was thinking of 114, but I don't know if that section down right, I can't think of the name of that.
Yes, so we do Ipswich River Road, which is right off of 114.
Right there, off of 114.
Yeah, so we do that one, but again, there's still a good treatment through our storm drain system before any runoff from the road gets to the river.
Okay,
There's enough room.
thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chairman.
Mike?
I noticed that your gas and diesel or figures are down. Are those realistic figures you're giving us?
So obviously, we do our best shot at predicting, get together as a team and predict a number for next year. So next year, we've thrown $2.74 per gallon for unleaded. Diesel is at $3.30. Those are the numbers, and then we tie those into the number of gallons based on a 5-year average. So right now, we're in the ballpark with the unleaded. However, at $2.74, we're a little bit, actually, the price we're paying is a little bit below that. We're paying just under $2.50. So we're good right now, but we all know that could jump up in a heartbeat. So $2.74 and $3.30 is what we're doing the budget on.
Okay, it's a nice lean budget. Thank you very much.
So, one question. So I live over in the River Run complex, and I've always wondered why the town doesn't manage the rubbish and recycling in the complex.
Sure, it's a good question for the planning director when he comes in. However, when condominium complexes are developed, they don't build the roads to town standards. The roads are built more like driveways. So a lot of them don't have room for the trucks to go, and the cars are in the way, many other things. So they're not designed on town roads, so we only collect refuse and recycling off public ways, town roads. If they had built the condos, and we have certain condos which are on public ways, those we pick up the refuse and recycling from as long as it's 4 units or less. So that's why it is. And then, so obviously, those people, when they built the complexes, they were able to build them a lot less expensively because they didn't have to build it on town roads. So the unit price of them was less money than it would have been if they had put all town roads through the condominium complex.
Great, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could, on that particular issue, many years ago, Mark probably remembers this, we had, it was a statewide condominium group, actually was going around from town to town, and they were trying to get bylaws in those communities that would require pickup in these condominium projects. And they went for a special town meeting, and they scheduled a special town meeting. I think it was like right after Thanksgiving or something like that. But they didn't realize that we were a representative town meeting, because what they had done in these other communities is they had basically jammed the town meeting with condominium owners, and they'd got these passed. And so they tried this, and I've never heard, I think Bill will probably tell you the same thing, a more resounding no at town meeting than when they tried to get that through at that particular meeting. So I don't think it's going to happen anytime soon either, that they get picked up.
Okay, thanks.
Sally?
Thank you. Well, I think it's a pretty amazing budget. And to think that the savings in snow removal basically offsets all the increases in other lines, including refuse collection and disposal. It's a great budget. Thank you.
Thanks, Sally. Any questions from the audience? Yes.
Nova Samade, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. So I know it could backfire, but with the recycling part, is there it would be nice to be able to be transparent with the community about what actually gets recycled, so that, what could happen is everyone could just throw everything in the trash and not worry about it. But ideally, we all need to think about what we're buying. So if people know, like, hey, I know you're buying all this plastic stuff that everything comes in, but none of it gets recycled, people might actually start to think about what they're buying and not just going, oh, it just gets recycled, it just gets recycled. But there's not really transparency in knowing, unless you watch like a news program, but the town just says, hey, it's free recycling, but it's not really. We don't really recycle. But I don't know if JRM tells us what they do with it. I don't know. Anyway, and has there been any consideration of promoting composting? I know that there's a town around us, I don't remember who it is, but has made, is it Manchester? That's made composting mandatory. And I don't know if they do it for environmental reasons plus savings in trash disposal, but it's something. And even just a promotion of it.
So we've had proposals from Black Earth Composting
Yeah.
for them to gear up and do it, and in Danvers, we've usually liked to do things that are tried and true. We want to make sure it's going to work. We don't want to gear up and start a program and have it fail a year and a half or 2 years later. So we're watching what they're doing with Black Earth in the surrounding towns and see if this is going to work. Can it work in a town the size of Danvers, where houses are closer together and we just cannot leave that compost out on the curb. It can't be missed. You can't put it out late. It just becomes a nuisance and a real hazard out there. It became very quickly. We're going to continue to watch that and see. That is something that, like a behavioral thing that the board has mentioned previously, that we could do to get more material out of the waste stream.
Right.
We have done some trials with the textile recycling to try to do that. So that was an adder this year. We want to dabble on that a little bit and try it. So we're watching the chicken to see how the results of that come out also.
I will just say this, I use Black Earth.
Oh, yeah.
So they come like holidays, they are there every week without fail. So I'll just say that if they don't even, I think they skipped a week when we had like a foot of snow or something like that. But other than that, they've been good. I've had them for about a year and it's worked out great.
Yeah, we're going through, and the same thing we're going through with our leaf composting, just like the recycle. We have some landscapers here, is we need to watch out for our leaf compost on the back end, that they have markets for that material.
Right.
Some
Right,
years
right.
they don't have markets for that, or they haven't geared up and composted enough, or it wasn't a good year for compost, and suddenly leaves are backed up, in the compost rows.
Right.
So we have to work, same thing with the compost, that make sure there's a market there.
Yes.
That's tried and true.
Great, thanks.
Mr. Chairman, if I could speak to that composting issue a little bit. I've been composting in this town commercially for over 30 years. My situation expanded dramatically when one of Dave's predecessors, a former Director of Public Works, Newt Sweet, asked me to take in more stuff from landscapers in town when the laws were changed in the early 1980s. 3 years ago, I was taking in composting from 65 different companies at my farm, processing it, and hopefully selling it or using it on my farm. In the last 2 years, the environmentalists have pressured the Department of Agriculture to constrain the operations of composting, and they have dramatically affected a lot of us, where we have to decrease our composting by 80–90% because they won't let us operate in a certain way. You are left with maybe 2 or 3 alternatives on the North Shore, Northeast Nursery, Woods Trucking in Peabody, and not much else to get rid of yard waste. And the prices have gone up dramatically, and we have to curtail what we can bring in. I basically had to go from 65 to 7 contractors in a year. And it's a major problem for these landscapers because the prices are escalating dramatically, and there's basically nowhere they can take it. The kind of waste that you're talking about from houses could be food waste, and that itself causes some problems, and it's difficult to compost legally and carefully because food waste, when it's integrated into a composting operation, unless it's buried properly, will be scavenged by seagulls in this area, crows in the western part of the state, or other animals, and it makes a real mess, and it smells. That's why some of us don't take food waste. But it's a major problem. We're not getting support from the state right now, and it's a rather frustrating situation because it's a great thing to do. It's good for your gardens, But realistically, some of the governmental agencies, because people complain about the smell, or they don't like the way that it's being done, they've dramatically controlled it. We have now 38 pages of state regulations governing composting in the state.
Thank you, Bill. Any other questions from the audience? Mark?
Just to address the condo and apartment complex trash and recycling pickup. I think they pick up some recycling already that are close to the roads. But that was done back 25 years ago by agreement with the Planning Board and Zoning Board of Appeals, and those condos were built in a isolated or gated community, basically. And that was an issue that was not going to go away, but finally the town meeting said no way. The recycling issue that I have, and the budget is fine. I don't have any problem with the budget, but we have to realize that recycling was imposed on us by state directives and state regulations. And I remember that maybe 15 years ago, David, I think when we went into the 2 barrels and recycling bin had to be out with the trash, or the trash wasn't going to get picked up, at that time, we invested in an extra truck. I think it was at $90,000 a year, just to support that recycling effort. Now, I may be wrong, but that's what I remember. So trash and yard waste and recycling is not cheap. And it is not, I don't believe it is as explicit as it was explained that it's all mixed together, because I know we've built plants in New Hampshire and Maine to recycle paper and cardboard and boxes. And that's the recycled paper mills that we've, tried 20 years ago, 25 years ago. They went out of business because they couldn't get enough recycling at that time. China has taken over the recycling for the last 25 years, but ultimately now they will not accept it because they don't have that manufacturing capabilities anymore, or they don't want to do that. So the budget is fine, but I think, the words of woe about recycling, rubbish pickup, and yard waste pickup, I think they're going to come to their senses. So I don't think it's as dire as everybody thinks. And yard waste is one of the things that we recycle at the transfer facility. I don't want to call it a dump.
So
But
we don't recycle it there. We contract with a facility in Beverly to recycle.
somebody comes in and picks it up and takes it away, and they recycle it.
Correct.
But right now, we have capability of delivering yard waste to the transfer facility. So that's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. Any other questions? Is there a motion?
Move the Public Works Tax Board.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Hi, Tim Donahue, meeting member, Precinct 4. I'm curious what our relationship is with JRM and with Cantava, one being our normal pickup, the other one being the transfer station. Between the two of them, how do they independently function and how do they function together as the town? And would we be better off trying to get one contract with one vendor rather than two?
So we have a completely separate contract with Covanta for disposal. And that's because they own the facility, we need to contract with them. The last time that came up for renewal, we shopped that around. We looked at contracting even with JRM for disposal. Could we do disposal? At the end of the day, we chose to go back with Covanta again. The transfer station, the town of Danvers owns the property, the land. Covanta owns the transfer station building, and they own the license. So they are charged with operating that. They do it with an agreement with us that's part of the disposal contract. We have that built in there. As far as who's actually up there running the transfer station, as far as pushing material in the scale house, Covanta can either run that with their employees, or they can hire a subcontractor with our approval. And they've done it both ways.
Thank you. And then again, through the chair, when do both licenses expire at the same time? Do both contracts expire at the same
No,
time?
we're just at the beginning of that 10-year contract.
Thank you.
All right. Mike, I think you made a motion.
Move the Public Works tax-supported budget.
Is there a
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
So the next budget that we'll walk through is the sewer enterprise budget. This is on page 49 in the budget book. Far and away the largest expense, the two large expenses in sewer are debt service as well as our SESD assessment. That's the South Essex Sewerage District, and that's where the effluent in Danvers flows to be treated through a network of pipes that the maintenance for is our obligation as part of that system, and it's as has been the case thus far. It's a fairly straightforward budget. We are seeing an uptick in debt service related to some authorizations that were passed by town meeting a couple of years ago, so that we could be borrowing on a regular schedule to do work on our system. There's it's a large percent increase, but a modest increase in the capital outlay request this year. I think we'll take any questions that you have.
Sally?
So the debt budget is growing by $660,000, and the SESD assessment is increasing by $98,000. And those are the two big drivers you're saying?
Those are the drivers, correct.
In the salaries and wages section of the budget, there's a slight increase too, I assume primarily driven by the 53rd week of the
Anticipated contract settlement and the 53rd pay period, yes.
Okay, those were the major points that I was wondering about. You've already addressed them, so I'm all set. Thank you.
Eric?
No questions.
Mike?
The only one I had a question on was the catch basin cleaning. Where is that located?
So catch basin cleaning is line 52931.
Actually, our budget book does not include,
But you don't have the.
It's on page 50, excuse me. It's on
I
page 50, about halfway down.
I'm sorry, I should have looked that up there, sorry.
Yeah, not just one, where is the catch basin cleaning?
So catch basin cleaning, it's all over town. We're required to clean an X number of catch basins every year under our stormwater permit. So we hire a contractor to come in and clean those basins out all over town.
Okay, thank you.
Paul?
No, I'm all set, thank you.
I'm good.
Ted?
All set.
Any questions from the audience? Mark, you can go first this time.
You do know how this works, the chairman tells you. No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggan, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. Just wanted to speak to the assessment. So I think that is a yearly or an annual increase, I believe. And it shows up on the bills, and a number of residents have expressed angst about not really understanding why the increases happen. And this also pertains to the electric bill from February when we had the service charge. But I think there's a lack of transparency to the users, when they get their monthly bills, then they don't understand if there may be an anomaly about why the bills are increasing. In some cases, it seems dramatically for them, upwards, like when I say dramatically, maybe 20 or 25%. So just a suggestion that in the future, when we have these types of additions to the bills, like the service charge, that we actually describe it to them, to the users, so they have a better understanding of rather than just making assumptions. So back to the assessment. So I know that the city of Salem did a reassessment on the facility on, I think it's Fort Road down by the Willows. So the city of Salem reassessed that property, and the member communities, except for Salem, had to pay an increase. I think that might be part of the driver. And then also with the cost of chemicals and for materials such as piping that the district uses. So is that's something that we'll be seeing in the future, that these increases to the assessments? I mean, 2.5%, that seems somewhat reasonable, but do we ever see something that's more dramatic than the 2.5?
Sure. We have staff, I believe the selectmen are all provided with a full, very detailed budget of the complete operation of the district. We have those numbers. It's very detailed, every penny, how it's spent, where it goes. We also have a very detailed calculation of how it's divided up among the member towns, how many gallons it's divided up among, and how the concentration of our flow. We have detailed sheets showing that. It's all very straightforward, and it's actually done by engineers instead of accountants, most of it, but it's all figured out, and we're provided detailed documents of that.
Okay, all right, that's fine. And I'm glad to hear you that you're on top of that.
So, and I just I want to add is that the assessment, the actual assessment, actually it's coming in just slightly less than 2.5%, more like 2%, when the actual, we're working through those numbers right now. But it's not only increases in the budget, it could be that Danvers sent more water or more wastewater there, or sent more concentrated water there. So they could have a level budget, but we had a bigger piece of the pie, that could drive our budget up.
Okay, and then just one more question. About the permit that the facility has from the Mass DEP and from the EPA, that was recently renewed, I believe. Is that something that we keep an eye on, that we're not, there may be some type of violation in the future where they don't meet the standards and they would have to spend significantly amount of money to upgrade the plant, so similar to what happened on Deer Island with I forget what it's called, MDC, I think?
MWRA.
MWRA.
So we have a representative on the board. We have our town engineer. It's delegated by the town manager who's going to represent Danvers. For a long time, it's been the town engineer who's been our representative. Rick Rogers did a great job representing Danvers on the board. Stephen King has picked right up in his shoes to monitor every question that you just asked. We want to know what their capital plan looks like, what the permits are looking like, and they do that. Stephen King also, and myself, we also keep very close relationships with the other members of the board. The member from Beverly, the member from Salem, member from Peabody. We might always be on the same interest, but we're keeping close eye on the whole works.
All right, that's great, because we don't want any fiscal surprises, because it could be quite expensive, I think.
Right. Everything's based on long-term capital planning right now.
Thank you, Mr. Lane.
If I could just add on a couple of points to what David was saying. With respect to the bill, just so folks know, there is a detailed explanation of the electric bill that is on the Electric Division website. Anyone who wants to go to the website can click on that and get a detailed explanation of the bill. With respect to you mentioned a reassessment of the property. I want to make a couple of points. Although SCSD is located in Salem, it is governed by an independent board, so it's not a City of Salem run facility. And the pilot associated with that property is actually set in statute. I'm not familiar with the reassessment that was done recently, but I do recall, it's probably 5 years ago now, the City of Salem engaged the other communities to see if they were willing to increase the pilot, and the answer was no. So that is set in statute. So the pilot, regardless of the valuations on the property or the depreciated net assets, doesn't change absent legislation. So that would require the delegation of the North Shore putting forward a bill and changing it as a group. So that's fixed. I think that, yeah, thank you. And then David made the other comment on it. So.
Mark?
Thank you. Mr. Duggan picked up on the same question I had, but I will go into a little bit more detail because SESD, which is the South Essex Sewers District, is governed by, I think, 4 or 5 towns. Five. And one of the major participants, because it's located in Salem, is the main contributor. They collect all their waste, and we have a couple of lines coming in to feed. Other towns do as well. However, the SESD has an organization that allows the general public to participate in their meetings. And as you said, I have participated in those as on the Board of Selectmen, and they do go through every detail of the estimate of the budget. And there's an opportunity at that time to chime in and ask for relief for certain towns if that's necessary. I'm just wondering who represents the town of Danvers in the SESD meetings. Is it just Mr. King?
Correct. Stephen King is appointed to the board by the town manager.
Okay. Are there any Board of Selectmen that go to those meetings? Because that's a town-wide representation that has to take place. I'm just wondering whether they do or not.
So I couldn't speak to whether they've been there recently. Selectmen have gone in the past to those meetings. They have participated, but I couldn't speak to that recently.
Okay. My other question is more related to the bills that we're getting. I know that the sewer piece, I was at the meeting and it did not go up as much as the water or the electric in the future. But the sewer has been dependent on feedback from SESD because we had some reserves that we control. And that's how it's compensating the budget that we are responsible for. So our 2.5%, that's probably the lightest one, but they do allow us to attend and participate in those meetings. So they're very public and they're very good control over there. Thank you. Oh, I forgot. What about the fee that's being that has been instituted on the water and sewer bill? How is that allowed to increase or be even on the bill? Because I don't remember it originally, years back.
So the current rates were set by the water sewer commissioners in June. The minimum charge that's been on there has been on there for a number of years now. I want to say 4 years, Peter? Approximately 4 years, the customer charge has been on there, which is when it was instituted. About the same time that we formalized the sewer division into an enterprise fund. Previously, it operated like an enterprise fund, but wasn't set up as a true enterprise fund.
So that's been in effect for 3 or 4 years?
Correct.
All right, thank you.
Any other questions? Is there a motion?
Move the budget.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
Third is the water budget, page 53 in your budget books. And I would never deprive David the opportunity to talk about the increase in the sludge removal costs associated with this particular. But for those who are not familiar with the water treatment plant that we use is located in the town of Middleton. It is operated for the benefit of both Danvers and Middleton residents. I think roughly 3.5 million gallons of water per day are treated at that plant. And I would, as has been the course, this is a level service budget outside of contractual increases and some modest adjustments for things like sludge removal, and we'd be happy to take questions from the committee.
I forget which end we're starting at this time, but we'll go with Ted.
Is now a fair time to ask about rate increases and whether,
Sure.
So we've looked at, as you can see, there's a very, almost a level funded budget in front of you. We've actually worked on the capital projects so that they would also fit within our retained earnings policy, the capital projects that we'll be voting on later on. So if revenues come like we expect, we would see a very modest increase at all in both the water and the sewer, is where we're headed.
okay.
One of the things, I'll just add on just briefly, we've talked about this at previous budget meetings. One of the issues that we face on the water side, and it also affects us on the sewer side to a certain extent, is that our sales have declined, I want to say, year over year for the better part of 5, 6, 7 years now, because we operate under a permit that's issued by the DEP. That permit has restrictions associated with it. So even if our budget stays level funded, we're selling less water. The rate increases to adjust for that lost revenue so that the system can be maintained. And this was a big point of interest a couple of years ago when we had double-digit rate increases. We had the Water Sewer Commission had avoided that for as long as possible, but with sales being down year after year after year, the only way to make that up is through the rate. So that's the dial that is turned each June when the Sewer Committee, the Water Sewer is looking at that.
So just to jump on what Steve was saying a little bit more, we've really watched our revenues and our gallons sold this year through the COVID crisis and all that. We were very concerned at the beginning of the year. And Peter's kept a close eye on it, and Angelica, and we've had a real difference this year where, as you can imagine, our residential numbers are higher and the commercial numbers are lower this year. So it's coming out, but unfortunately our residents are going to see it. They're going to use more water this year because they're home. And we're seeing less on the commercial side. That's how it's coming out. But if you blend those together, the revenues are coming out right where we need them to be.
Can I ask one other question? Like, I know Gardner wrote a long explanation of the water saga on Facebook a couple weeks ago. And alluded to like a high cost of hooking into the water authority that everybody else uses or that other people use.
Sure.
Like he said, it would be millions of dollars. How many millions of dollars would it cost us?
$20 to $30 million probably. The big thing, we have to build a pipeline to get the water here, and then we would have to pay a connection fee under their current system.
And then on top of that, the rate.
And then we hit rates which are higher than ours.
Okay, thank you. That's it. Next. I'm good.
Mike?
No, I'm good, thank you.
Paul?
What Ted was just referring to, would that be the MWRA?
Correct.
Just slide in with them at some point. I don't know why. But, so basically, we're using less water and paying a little bit more. Is that what to sum it up?
The system costs the same amount each year to operate regardless of the amount of water being sold.
And I should tell the board, we had to do a financial analysis on joining the MWRA before we did our treatment plant upgrades back in 04, 05, because that was a $20 million project. We had to really look back then at, are we going to want to join the MWRA in the next 20 years while we have bonds for that $20 million, or is it better to spend the money and do our plant? For Danvers, at the time, and so far, it's been better that we invested in our plant and did that. There have been other communities that are closer to the MWRA, they're closer to hook up, they don't have to build a big pipeline, that have chosen not to build treatment plants and are hooking up to the MWRA instead.
Thank you.
Judy, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, I know, I think 1 or 2 years ago, we approved a warrant article to do some well testing.
Sure.
did we come up dry there, or what's the update on that?
Yeah, that was the well testing at the Rebecca Nurse, and
Yeah.
our town engineer was very enthusiastic. We thought we really had the slot. We had the surrounding radius we needed. The test wells just didn't show the capacity we needed. We were very disappointed.
Okay. Are there any other?
We're studying a
Sources
few
that
other
could alleviate-
spots.
yeah.
Nothing that I can talk about tonight, but
Okay.
we're keeping the look on, and our town manager keeps pushing us to keep looking for spots.
Okay.
You're working on it.
Yes, sir. Yeah, but we're working on it.
Thank you.
It's actually true.
The Middleton refund, you've been able to keep that pretty stabilized?
So we've kept that level because we are still in the middle of renewing the intermunicipal agreement with Middleton. So we're in a negotiation with the town on that agreement as right now, and we have been. And that's tied in with the renewal of our Water Management Act permit, that we need to update the intermunicipal agreement with Middleton. So we've just kept that level through this process.
All right, thank you.
Can you just talk for a minute, a little bit about what is in the agreement currently?
So the agreement set limits on how many gallons of our permit we would allocate towards Middleton. It also had a complex formula where Middleton would get a portion of the revenues that were generated through the rate that would go back to Middleton. And then it also contains language about how we can set the Middleton rate, how we can charge, what we can, what we cannot do. And also it talks about the services that Middleton needs to provide, where they need to take care of their own distribution system, fire, hydrants, et cetera.
And just to elaborate, so from the sky level view of the DEP, Middleton and Danvers operate under the same permit with the same registered volume and permitted volume. Within that allotment, we have to negotiate with Middleton to determine what the appropriate allocation is between the two communities. And that's been the case for 20-plus years.
Right.
Yeah. Well, a century or more, I guess. but
Yeah.
The
For a
current
century.
agreement is 20-plus years.
Great, thank you. Eric?
I just wanted to say I appreciate the thorough explanations of taking something that can be very complicated to make it simple. I appreciate that, and the budget is obviously tight, and so I don't have any other questions.
Sally?
Thank you. I should have asked it with the last budget too, but support services were increased in both budgets. Can you just explain what that is?
Sure, Rodney will probably jump in better. It's a formula that's done through the finance director.
So that's our indirect costs related to HR, accounting, treasurer collector, et cetera. So that's based on a formula that we submit. It's in the budget packet if you spin back in the supplemental section. It's
Oh,
also
there you
vetted by Melanson, our independent auditor, every year to make sure it's in compliance with proper indirect cost charges for state regulations.
I recall.
Yeah.
So in this water budget, there's a $4,000 increase for Medicare and FICA. And in the sewer, there was an increase of almost $10,000 for $20,000 for health and dental costs. Are those unusual increases for this year? They didn't strike me as we looked at other budgets.
I think part of that, again, Stuart, it's a smaller workforce, so anytime you have some plan changes like we just went through, switching from Tufts to Maya, as we saw some of those, both migration of the plans as well as capturing some that perhaps were charged to general fund versus sewer, really we took a deep dive into all of that when we made the switch to Maya and course corrected a lot. So you're seeing some of that in this year's budget.
So this is capturing the expenses from these two budgets.
Correct. Yeah.
Thank you, that's it for me.
Thanks, Ellen. Any questions from the audience? Bill?
Bill Bradstreet, town meeting member of Precinct 1. We have a reservoir in Middleton that serves Danvers, Middleton, and the jail. How does we pay our bills? Middleton does. How does the state pay for the water usage that they are given or what have you? The other thing was the reservoir doesn't have the capacity we need, and we're prevented, or is it too cost-effective for us to increase the capacity of storage of water? It's awful to see water go downstream that we could be saving and using. Is it the cost, the upfront cost, the time element, why we're not doing something about the reservoir that we had planned on? I don't know, Bill Clark could probably tell you how long ago we started this process, and we aren't any further along.
So we've looked at two separate issues. Stephen King did a great job a couple years ago using some grant funding from the DEP and working with some of our design engineers to look at raising the level of raising the boards on the current reservoir. The cost benefit wasn't there to do that.
Of Middleton Pond.
Of Middleton Pond. The other issue was the land that was acquired decades ago by the town with the intent of developing a secondary reservoir. That permitting process stopped cold in its tracks with the Army Corps of Engineers, and we don't believe anything has changed today that would result in a different outcome.
Correct. Emerson Brook, we could not permit the increase.
Can we look at some point that that might change someplace, at some point in the future?
We're keeping an eye on the federal regulations that govern wetlands and govern water supplies. We've watched those very carefully especially over the last 4 years, to see if there was going to be an opportunity there. There was not. We will continue to watch that to see. We are also actively talking with all of our other towns in Essex County. Is there a possibility of another regional reservoir in this county? So that's on the table.
I guess my part of it would be the personnel who are making these choices that deny us the extra water. Are they going to be changing so that perhaps we might be able to do what we need to do here? I read an article in the paper today that said the Ipswich River is one of the, the distressed rivers in the country. How does that affect us and our water usage or supply?
It's affecting us through the renewal of our water permit, the withdrawal permit, and it will affect us in our water registration on how many gallons of water we can take out of the Ipswich River Basin each year and use it. It affects us with our lawn watering all summer and non-essential water usage. That's all of the restrictions. They're in place because we're in a stressed basin, stressed river. We are actively pushing back with the DEP. We want to be stewards of the environment. We want to do our piece. However, the municipal water suppliers represent a very small fraction of the Ipswich River and how much is drawn out of there. If we all stopped drawing water out of there, the science has shown the river would still dry up. We can't save the river by eliminating municipal water use. So we need to push back with the DEP and make sure that we're being stewards of the environment, yet we're getting the real message across and getting the real facts across and making sure that residents here don't have astronomical water bills and astronomical capital expenditures to try to save a resource that we're really not affecting.
Is part of our problem, say, the upfront cost to get something done is cost prohibitive as opposed to what it might be in the long run? If you pay it now, is it going to benefit us down the road, or are we just trying to kick the can down the road and at some point it's just not going to work?
The development of any kind of additional water supply is extremely expensive.
But we're going to have to pay it at some point if we don't do something, aren't we?
Well, right now, we continue to make best use of the water resources that we have and conserve like the town does. The town does a great job conserving. We'll have to keep looking at conservation and reuse of water. And at some point, we may have to look at other water sources, but we'll deal with that as they become available.
I'm not questioning the town's effort to do our part. I guess what I'm looking for is, I don't know, some benign person or entity to help us out.
Oh.
If I could jump in.
I'm just going to have...
There are no benign entities out there. I think the DEP is the closest that we're going to come to that. But just looking at the budget screen as an example, earlier we talked about the well exploration that was done at the Rebecca Nurse Homestead.
Correct.
So we needed to figure out if there was volume, then we needed to determine if the volume was an appropriate quality. And the third and probably most difficult step was going to be the permitting of that water source, because one of our great concerns was even if we found a water source that was adequate, we would be facing millions of dollars in cost to get a system in to retrieve it and add it to the system. We had real concerns that the DEP would look at that and then net that new volume against our current permit. So if we expend millions of dollars to develop a new resource and are still permitted to sell no more water tomorrow than we could yesterday, we're just adding debt service onto the budget model you see here, and the rates are going to go up, and it's going to have we have access to more water, but the costs go up. So it's a really difficult regulatory process beyond just is there water under the ground that you can tap into.
So we're going to continue to be penalized for trying to do something about is a problem. I just am very disappointed that we're not the only ones that have this problem, and yet some entity is saying if you do something about it, it's going to cost you one way or another. I just find it very disappointing. I'm not questioning your answer. I'm just making a statement. I'm just very disappointed as one of many people who drinks water, needs water, and yet we're being denied, in a sense, the ability to get the water that we need, as long as we don't waste it, but get the water that we need.
And on a positive note, you were looking for a benign entity.
I still am.
There is an entity in the state that the DEP takes orders from, and that is the legislature, and we have had several productive discussions over the past 12 months with the North Shore delegation, because you're right, we're not the only community in this situation, and the state is starting to pay attention and be aware of the fact that we can't do this alone. So, this is a topic we'll be discussing a lot moving forward. It's a topic we have discussed a lot up until this point.
Thank you. We're working on it, right?
Mr. Chairman, I just want to say that this particular issue has been the most frustrating issue that I've faced in 15 years as a selectman. We have been trying to find solutions for this. There's obviously a very easy solution. Let us build a reservoir, store a year's supply of water, and we're all set in an environment that gets 40-odd inches of rain a year, much like Salem and Beverly is. But it's not that simple. And Steve has been very cooperative, and David, trying to pursue this for us. In fact, we had 2 studies we had done, and just as an example, and David alluded to this, but only 7% of the water used in the Ipswich River, the flows in the Ipswich River is used for all the municipal water supplies in the basin. The problem is, part of the problem is that we as a humble little community are up against some of the heaviest lobbying by nonprofit organizations. The Ipswich River Watershed Association is one of only 5 of those issues who have really strongly proposed the limitation of water use. The fact that the Ipswich River dries up in the summer is not new. It's happened, my father used to talk about it happening 100 years ago. It was a regular issue. However, some environmentalists have expended tremendous amounts of money and have had all kinds of lobbyists in Boston pursuing the issue of conservation. It's a double sword. If we conserve water as we have, and we have the fixed costs remaining the same, you have to pay more money. I was so frustrated with this issue about 15 years ago that I basically cut off entirely from the town's water supply for my farm. I have 2 wells. I'm not on the Ipswich River watershed location. Some people, or anyone in town who is not in the Ipswich River basin, could dig a well in their backyard, and if you were using water and have it tested once a year, there's an ample supply of water in much of the town. Not all the town, but much of the town. We have some potentially good locations that David can pursue, but I think Steve alluded to the fact our problem is that if we pursue them prior to the new contract, we may be penalized for it. They were giving us options like connecting to MWRA. That option, when we looked at it, was $21 million to get the first drop of water. Interbasin transfer from North Andover, where we run a line down 114 from North Andover, and we get reconstituted Merrimack River water. That's a possibility. There are several different possibilities, but they're all very, very expensive. And the artificial constraints of state and federal guidelines is really tying our hands dramatically, and it has been so frustrating over the past 15 years as we tried to pursue it. Remember Wayne was talking about he and Newt Sweetman in Boston in 1992, I believe it was, and expected to get approval for the reservoir in Middleton. They got rejected. and it's never had a chance to run since then. We have all the land. We bought it. We bought it over a period of 20 to 30 years. However, we can't use it. I think that Steve made a good comment last year or so. It's not a, it's a storage issue, not a supply issue. There's plenty of water there, it's just that we can't store it. And the best chance is to do some very strong lobbying with our state legislators, our senators and representatives. That's how things get done. And I think that we have to pursue that as a community. Steve has certainly tried to pursue it with the studies he's had done. We know that the minuscule amount of the water that is used for the municipalities would have little impact in the town. Right now, we're almost in a drought. The Ipswich River is still in flood stage in Topsfield. Just look at the parking lot of the Topsfield Fairgrounds. It's still flooded. That parking lot has been flooded all but 2 years in the last 27 years. I know because I'm on the board of the Topsfield Fair. Last year was the first year since the year I was president in 1998 that wasn't flooded during the fall. So the water is here, it's just we can't store it. The opposition to that is basically government interference, or government regulation, and the pursuing with very strong lobbyists from all 5 river associations. It's not just the Ipswich River Watershed Association. There's a Charles River Association, the Blackstone River Association, and they have a very strong influence in Boston.
Thanks, Bill.
Mr. Chairman, might I suggest that we change the town motto to the DEP unwilling?
The Salem Reservoir is in Danvers. Danvers Reservoir is in Middleton. Is there a possibility we could get some storage space up in, say, Topsfield, which isn't that far away?
So that, I mean, that's one of the topics that's being discussed right now with the delegation. So that, as I said, you know, Senator Tarr is kind of he's running point with this, but certainly Representative Kearns and Senator Lovely are included in this discussion as well. And so as I said a few minutes ago, the good news is the delegation is aware and paying attention, and we are not alone. This is an issue that not everybody, you know, a lot of communities are on the MWRA, and water's not a concern or priority for them. But particularly on the North Shore, it is, and it's something that we'll continue to work on.
So we're working on it.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Paul?
Every year, we sit here and we talk about, this is just an observation. It's not directed at you in any way. So relax.
I'm good. He is relaxed.
Okay, but we talk about growth. Every year we talk about growth. Well, what would happen if a major corporation came to this town and said, we want to bring in 1,500 to 2,000 employees? Would we be able to handle something like that, or is that just a non-starter? Curiosity.
I mean, we've never had to say no to business. We do have capacity for growth within our current permit. Part of our issue is the seasonal caps that are put in place. Mm-hmm. So it would require analysis by, you know, Stephen's staff working with the engineers to figure out what their demand actually is. But the short answer is I think we would figure that out, and we would partner with the state to figure that out. But we do have capacity still within our permit. Part of what we run into with the declining sales is a timing issue, as was alluded to. So we are forced to conserve at times of year, as Select Board Member Clark said, that the Topsfield Fairgrounds are flooding, and that makes no sense, and that's driven by the permit restrictions that are in place.
And you talk about there's other towns and cities in the area, maybe not in our immediate area, that aren't concerned. Mr. Clark mentioned it. Well, maybe they're not concerned with water. They've got plenty of water somehow, some way. We don't seem to be one of those communities, or if we can get to that water, we still can't store it. But I'm going to come back, as I guess this is my second year in a row bringing up the same topic, and I guess people out there looking and guess, here he goes, he's off the rails again. But is there any talk to the state or the feds or anybody about desalinization? I mean, it's not a new science, it's an expensive science. But, and we talked a little bit about it last year. I think I'm going to make it an annual event as long as I'm on the board. But is that totally out of the question just because of cost?
A town administrator on the North Shore raised it in the last discussion we had.
You did?
I did not, but
Another
a colleague
town.
on the North Shore, we were on a conference call with the Mass Waterworks Association, and the topic came up. So it comes down to cost and benefit. Right
Yeah.
now, looking for, it could be that developing additional storage reservoirs on the North Shore is more cost-effective than desalinization, but like most new technologies, I think we'll get to a point, whether it's in Essex County or somewhere else in the world, where it does become cost-effective and it's being utilized regularly.
Because the source is right here. It's not, I don't think it's a problem of availability, it's just a matter of technology and the cost of the technology.
It's the cost. It's the most
Yeah.
expensive technology to make it potable water.
Right. Next year, thank you.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Mark?
Speaking of costs, MWRA water is not cheap, that's for sure. The connection may cost us $20 million, but the cost of water is more expensive than anywhere else in the state. I'd like to come back to what we're here for. We've just looked at the Water Enterprise Fund budget. One of the questions that we haven't asked is, what is the revenue that we're collecting? Because last year, we raised our water rates by 15%. And all of a sudden, we're not talking about how much revenue are we collecting. So what I'm asking is, what is the revenue that's expected to be collected during this fiscal year based on the new rates?
So while David's coming up, I'll point, the 15% increase was 2 years ago. The rate increase last year was 4.3%.
2019, yeah.
And the Water and Sewer Commission adopted financial policies similar to the towns, where they are supposed to have 10% of their budget in retained earnings each year for things like we just saw with the collapse of the culvert near the Meadows. And so part of the rate increase 2 years ago was to make sure that our reserves were in a healthy position, because they were very, very low. They're in a much better spot now, but I think David would just consult with Peter, and I would defer to David.
Yeah, we don't, unfortunately, Mark, we don't have an exact number on our revenues right now for you. We monitor that every month. Right now, we're tracking on budget to cover the budget this year, just like we planned when we set the rates. We set the rates so that we would cover the budget. That's where our revenues are tracking right now. We'll know a lot better in June, just how we're doing. But right now, we're just covering costs.
Well, what I'm concerned about is similar to what's happening with the electric company. Is we have raised our rates, and we're putting that money in some kind of a reserve fund, but we're punishing our ratepayers by increasing the rates. Is the money collected? What I'm looking for is a this is what, an $8 million budget, 8.8. What's the revenue? Is it 10 million? 9 million?
So our revenue will be just over 8 million. Our retained earnings, which we call it for these enterprise funds, we set our retained earnings in accordance with the financial policies that we've developed with the finance director and with the town manager. We've designed the capital outlay projects that we'll be talking about later on, so that we can take money out of that retained earnings and have it still be at the 10% threshold level that is in our policy. So we're designed the policy so that the capital projects fit, and we don't go below, and we don't make it doesn't increase too big.
Well,
that's right where we are.
I disagree, but the increase has already happened. And what I'm wondering, and I asked for this information about a month and a half ago, because, the public is not available to get to your meetings that you have monthly. And at that meeting, every meeting, you had the value right there. And I appreciated that, because I've always asked the question at town meeting, what is our reserve and what our rates are going to increase to because of the budget increases that you've have.
So if I could, I'd like to chime in for just a second. We discuss this every year. The reserve numbers you're asking about are snapshots. You can find those in the audit. I'm looking at the certified retained earnings that the state produces each year. We don't have a real-time answer to the question you're asking, which is why we didn't have an answer 2 months ago. Each year, we have a certification, just like with free cash. In December each year, the state tells us what our retained earnings are, which are the reserves that we have for our utilities. And at each town meeting, we appropriate a certain amount of those retained earnings to cover the capital cost. And similar to the general fund, we have to maintain a certain amount. So in an $8.8 million budget, $880,000 would be 10% of the operating. So each year we ensure that we have that as a residual. We collect the revenue to cover the cost. If sales exceed projections, we generate a surplus. If costs are below the budget, we generate a surplus. That becomes part of the next year's retained earnings and so forth. So we can't answer that in real time. But you can look at this, you can look in the budget booklet, you can look in the warrant, you'll see what's being spent out.
Thank you. The issue is that we're getting rate increases. However, we're also getting, level 4 restraints on water usage. So where is the public going to go? We're a captive audience. Thank you.
Go ahead.
Nova Samade Town Meeting Member Precinct 1. Since we're all just kind of saying things we've said in the past, I'm going to join in. As far as I am concerned, we can't continue to pay low rates for our water any longer. It's over. Those days are done. We have less snowpack some years. We have less rain some years. We have population growth, and so we still have to pay to run it. Costs the same and more to run it every year. So our rates have to go up because we have to use less because there is less to use. Okay, that's all. I just had to say that.
Thank you. Any other questions from board members? Is there a motion?
Move the budget.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you.
So next is the electric division, and the budget. We were talking to Eric before the process started about the budget, answering questions, and he made the astute observation that the budget looks an awful lot different from the other budget, and that is because we follow federally required accounting practices for the electric utility. They're different from the way that we budget other departments. So what you have on the screen in front of you is a summary slide of the budget itself. Similar to what we're seeing in the water and sewer, sales have been flat or slightly declining on the electric side, and that's a result of a lot of things. That when our growth is not significant in Danvers, I know people feel like we're growing a great deal, but when you zoom out to the national level, our growth here is under 1%. There are parts of the country where growth is in double digits. So we're not growing fast, and when things are replaced, they're replaced with much more efficient items, whether it's parking lot lighting or appliances in homes. So we've seen a flat or declining experience on the electric side as well. And the budget is comprised of a combination of the power that we purchase and the cost to maintain the system that we have that ensures that there's electricity where and when it's needed. And I think I would defer straight to David to provide any additional detail before we take any questions.
No, thanks, Steve, that's very good. Right, our sales in kilowatt hours are flat. Actually, we're showing a slight decrease from last year. Just like Steve said, that's an industry standard across other utilities just like ours. We're hoping everyone will start to buy electric vehicles, and that'll ramp right up, get some electric heat pumps in. We're ready to sell more electricity so that it's less expensive for everybody. A little different than water. This we can sell more of. Sales are flat. The cost to buy power next year on the wholesale market is going down slightly, projected to be down slightly. However, the cost that we pay for the big transmission lines to bring the power to Danvers, that cost has gone up. So our operational costs are very level, but when we take the decrease in power, the increase in transmission costs, and flat sales, it becomes what we consider a very level budget this year, when you blend all those parts and pieces together. Other than that, the budget is very much the same. Our depreciation line item that we use to set our capital program is one of the biggest line items. We've still kept that at the 3% level, which it's been at for a number of years now. We have projected to stay at 3% for a couple more years until we get into a couple of substation changes. We have the substation that's down behind the Liberty Tree Mall we need to redevelop, and we need to do redevelopment work at our main substation called Station 42 on Bow Street. Those are our biggest projects that are coming, and we're looking at what's going to be the best way to fund those projects in the coming years. The other thing I wanted to mention in the book, on the next slide, Rodney, is we did include the pie chart that our Assistant Utility Director, Clint Allen, and his staff have put together. This represents where the power comes from on the wholesale market. Each year we talk about that we have a multitude of contracts. Each piece of that pie represents a different power contract that we have with a plant or a facility. Obviously, the biggest chunk is with Seabrook, the nuclear power plant that we own a piece of. But there's natural gas, there's hydropower, there's wind power, solar power. Those are all the different parts and pieces. And we've added more information to the chart this year to say a little bit more of what type of contract it is, whether it's a renewable, whether it's a carbon-free contract, as we are gearing up following the new state regulations that are setting goals and thresholds for how much of our power is going to be should be carbon-free, how much should be renewable. Right now, we're well underway to meet those goals, and we're preparing for them as they come down the future years. Each day is a new, it's either a up or down, and Clint can attest to this, how we doing on the renewables. Palmer, Mass was a wood waste facility that we thought was good, and we have a contract lined up for that. That was going to be a good addition to our power supply in 2 years. Suddenly now the DEP's changed their mind on that, and that plant may be going nowhere. As that one goes down, the wind off the Cape suddenly gets more optimistic. So in the power market, a lot changing out there. And this is how we manage the power supply. We do have a policy on how much we leave to the open market. We want to be no more than 10% in the open market. That's what we've done in order so we don't run into issues like they ran into down in Texas. And so but we need to have one piece that's a buffer so that we're not selling power back into the market. We don't want to overbuy. Can we take questions on the electric budget, I think?
Sally?
Thank you. It's always, it's such a different type of budget each year. It's hard to analyze, but from where I'm sitting, I can't really read the pie chart very well.
They don't have that, Rodney?
It's not in the budget book. If you want it, we have a laser, if you want to describe generally what the color.
You don't have to go into a lot of detail, but just to let us know what, like that Seabrook
That
you
thing
said.
right there, that one is Seabrook. Actually, I'll let Clint Allen come up and talk. Clint, can you talk about the different parts of the pie?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, good evening, Clint Allen, Assistant Utility Director. So I think, yeah, we want to start in, I guess, southeastern quadrant. Okay. Even better, thanks. No, already? No, okay, so we'll start down here. This is, our largest portion is the long-term Seabrook contract. And we're moving on, so it is hard to read here, but this recently was approved by the NRC for a contract extension to 2050. Going around clockwise, our next contract here is the Millstone 3 nuclear. So that is an NRC date of 2045. Down here we have this is our Stony Brook natural gas long-term bilateral contract. This aquamarine piece here is kind of middle term bilateral agreement with NextEra Energy. It's a natural gas contract. This is another midterm bilateral with NextEra Energy. It's also a natural gas contract. Coming up to the top, dark green band here is, these are our hydro, I believe this is our first light hydro deal. This one's out to 23, and we're currently in talks of extending that. The next slice here is our NIPA agreement for our residential hydro sales, so it's a hydro-based contract, long-term. Moving over, our next, this is a wind, the kind of key line. This is our Saddleback Wind Project. That's a long-term agreement to up to 2035. Yep. And then we're moving on to the next. For Canton Mountain Wind, that's another long-term contract, wind contract. Here's a Brown Bear Hydro contract. That is actually up quarter 2/21. We're in current negotiations to extend that another 5 years with Warumbo now. And this tiny little gold slice here, that would be our solar agreements now. Those are actual in-town agreements. Those are both actually in Danvers. I can't see this. Yeah, indoor, 150 Andover up at Cherry Hill. And then lastly, our gray slice, that's about 5%. That's our open market exposure for 21.
Thank you. So I know that as you drive through town, I've noticed more and more properties having rooftop solar panels. Does that have any impact on all of this stuff?
So there's a representative slice in here for solar that we have contracted for. When a residential unit does solar, we don't reflect it on this chart because we're doing that through the net metering program with the resident. Where the resident gets credits, they're buying, the credits offset what they power. So you won't see that show up on this chart. Approximately how much do we have, Clint?
Percentage-wise, it's about 50%.
How many megawatts? So we have a couple megawatts of residential solar out there also through the net metering program.
Okay.
Which you're correct, it does grow every year.
Those were basically my questions, kind of where we're purchasing electricity. Thank you very much.
Eric?
Sure. Dave, I believe you said earlier that supply costs are down. It's cheaper to buy, but it costs more to transport?
Correct.
Where do you see the trends going? What is your anticipation of the future of that dynamic?
We see transmission costs, we took a big bump this year in transmission, and we see modest bumps for the next 2 years after that. And so that's on the we do see some increases coming, but not as big as this year, is where they're projected right now. On the power supply costs, the natural gas power continues to be very low. That's our most inexpensive power right now, is the natural gas power. The renewable power costs a little bit more than that. However, the latest renewable contracts are coming in far lower than they've been over the last 10 years. So we're very pleased to see that renewable contracts are coming in at more of a reasonable rate. In the Seabrook, that's kind of like a fixed cost that we have. It stays relatively the same.
Thank you.
But nuclear is not our most inexpensive power anymore. It used to be, but not anymore.
The other point, you mentioned something about electric cars. I take that to mean we just need to drive sales up.
Absolutely.
Okay.
I need to have a commercial. I got to work on Clint to get a commercial going. Heat pumps, yeah, we want to sell more power.
Thanks, Dave.
Mike?
Yeah, down the bottom of page 60, you show the profit or loss of a little over $2 million. And then the pilot, that's a decrease from the profit of $1.125,838,000.
Correct. That's the payment in lieu of taxes that we make back to the town under that formula.
Payment that you make back to the town.
Correct.
Okay.
Payment in lieu of taxes. So we don't pay taxes, but we pay the town.
Okay, 903 on page 62, clerical expenses. That went up substantially.
So the clerical expenses,
Almost 200,000. 903.
So it's related right into our clerical issues with our meter reading issues. And I'm not sure why that wasn't capitalized over that increase. But that's cost to do with the meter replacement program that we had going on. And I'm surprised that piece wasn't capitalized, but
All right.
that's what it's related to.
904, uncollectible accounts. Is that telling me that you can't collect $60,800 that people owe you?
Correct. Every year, we have to have a certain amount that we have to deem it as uncollectible. We do it as a last resort. This is someone that didn't pay and moved out of town and left on us, or something like that. We do have, electric's a little bit different than water and sewer, where if you rent a house, you can become a customer of ours, a rental, and then if you leave and we can't track that person down, after certain efforts, it becomes uncollectible.
Wow. How about office supplies and expenses? 921, that went up substantially also.
Sure, an office was due to some office renovation work that had to be happened.
225,000?
Yeah, it was working off, right?
Okay, let's try 923, training. That's up substantially also. You've got some new people on the job, or?
So we do have a number of new people. We have 2 line workers that we've brought on as apprentice line workers and are bringing them up. They're second-class line workers on the way to become first-class line workers. In addition to that, we have a training system across the whole division for each employee. But that was the main increase.
Hazardous waste is way up.
So hazardous waste,
749 to 300,000.
correct, that is us working, we have hazardous waste to disposal when we find transformers that have old oil in it, that could have PCBs in it. We have to pay to remove that oil, depending on how many of those type of transformers we do each year. The big increase here, we are also working in the area we call Substation 20A. That's the facility on Holton Street, kind of behind the Borough Street, right there. We're working, we have some contamination in that site we need to clean up.
And let's see, one more here. 368.0, page 65, line transformers. That's up almost 250,000.
Correct, and that's just going to depend on how many of those, that type of transformer we actually replace that year.
Okay.
So that cost will get capitalized.
Wow. Okay, and what's the story on the Smith School? You're planning to put solar up there?
That's
Solar
correct.
panels?
Yes, the division has an RFP to go out for companies to supply and install a solar array to do that. We're going to wait for the school to get finished, and we're set up to put that up right on the roof. So we have that one underway. We also have the landfill solar project, where we want a solar array on top of the old landfill. That is right now at DEP working through the permit process.
Okay. Do you expect to use a percentage, some of the solar to power the Smith School?
The way it's set up, we're probably going to, all the power is going to transmit right back into the transmission lines with a direct link, and the school will take power like they do now. So it would be a credit to the school. We're going to work out how that goes, but it's not going to be, it's too big for like how we do it like on a residential home.
No.
We need the power to go right into the main 5 kV line.
Okay. Just one other question here. Down the Danvers Port area where I live, you've got that the substation is complete, but They shut us down March 28th for 6 hours on a Sunday morning. You know what was going on then, what they were doing there? They did it in 4.
So they got the subdivision complete, however, they had to bring the conductor lines and bring those into the substation. That's why we had to have that shut down for 6 hours.
It was good. They did it in 4 instead of 6, but then that same afternoon, around 5 o'clock, there was an outage for another hour. So, putting a blemish on your good service.
Isn't it great when I don't cause the outage later on? That was, so late that afternoon, we had an outage on the National Grid 115 lines. So Grid had an outage where
I know.
our system had to switch over.
As I drove down the street, Endicott Street, and I think even the shopping center was down.
Yeah, the whole Danvers East, right?
Yeah, yeah. And now 4/25, April, the end of April, you're gonna shut us down for an hour, I guess, to do some more work down there? I got a letter in the mail.
So that's part of, we're doing a number of transformer replacements on Water Street. Very old transformers that are leaking. There's no way to replace the transformers without taking the circuit down, unfortunately.
Well, you got it for only 1 hour, so hopefully you can do it in 1 hour.
Yeah, we'll be all set up and just cut it off, get the new ones in.
All right, thank you.
Paul?
Yes, how many electric car charging stations do we have? Just one?
So right now we put 2 public ones, one at Town Hall and we have them over at the Hobart Street parking lot also.
But
So
those are not available. The one at Town Hall, is that available to the public?
Yes.
It is.
Yeah, so we have the one at Town Hall,
Right.
and we have the one in the parking lot across the street from Town Hall,
Right.
and then we have them over on Hobart Street.
And is there a long-range plan as to how many you want put in town overall?
Yeah, right now, we're doing them as we can get grants, so they don't cost us to put in. So right now, we have a grant request in to do more. And so right now, we have another 3 to 6 that we'd like to be putting in the next year. So it's in progress. Nothing I can announce tonight, but we're working on it.
And these are just customers paying credit card, is that how it
Correct.
works? Yeah, okay. On the power description, power chart, if I heard you correctly, we're not really doing anything with a type of fossil fuel like coal and that type of...
No fuel and very little oil. We used to have a lot
Right.
more oil, very little of that, and no coal at all.
Okay. Now, I'm going to just jump over to another question I had. You did mention, I think, and pleased to hear that you're now looking at solar panels at the transfer station up in that area, the dump.
Correct.
Yeah.
It's in the permit stage at the DEP right now.
Good, excellent. And how many panels would you be thinking of long range?
So the panels that will, once we get the landfill filled in to make it level on the top,
Right.
it'll be enough panels to serve about 220 homes.
Excellent. Is that the limit? Would that be the limit to the maximum, or would there be an ability to expand that?
No, we're going to use every square inch we can. Yeah.
But is 200 panels the limit?
220 homes.
Would be the limit, right?
Yes, that would be the limit.
Okay. Now, you do look at nuclear, I mean, you have a commitment to nuclear power. I could see that
Correct.
through
And
Seabrook.
2 different plants.
How many plants?
We have both the Seabrook plant and the Millstone plant. So
Do we
there's
own
2.
anything in Millstone?
Yes.
We do. So we have an interest there. Are either of those plants in danger of not being certified or losing their license or closing down like we see at times nationwide?
Seabrook just went through their relicensing to 2035, so.
Through 2035.
Through 2035,
Yes.
correct. So obviously, we're dealing with plants that are getting older now.
Mhm.
So right now, so far, so good.
Right.
I hate to hedge my bet, knocking on the woods, but so far, so good. However, nuclear plants are getting more expensive to run. We need to keep an eye on the operating costs. So, but right now, we're planning them for the next decade anyways, so.
Okay. Because when I occasionally you see, I will see something on the tube about nuclear plants, et cetera, and experts keep coming back to it as a possibility. For a while, it was the power you wanted to get away from as fast as you could. I guess especially after Chernobyl and that type of a situation took place. But it's always a case of, to this day, they still don't know how to handle waste other than burying it in Yuma somewhere. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's been no significant improvements that I'm aware of, other than we build the receptacle for it.
That's it? Okay. Right now, that's it, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Yeah, Mark's not jumping up on that.
Dave, will you, because I know you're going to get this question probably from someone else, will you explain why we did the cost of service increase and explain how that works in terms of the bill for everybody?
Sure. When we looked at our business model, we had identified that customers that didn't use any electricity or used a very, very small amount were costing us money. It was negative. And so if you went to Florida
just quickly,
for 6 months,
could you explain how we found that out, the process that we used in terms of?
Oh, sure. We went through, we brought some professionals in that were well-respected in the field to do an efficiency audit, that worked with our staff, went through how we do everything, how we set all our costs, how we track our costs, how we do our accounting, how we do our billing, how the money goes out, how it comes in. They tracked everything. And they gave us a number of recommendations on how we could run a better business and run a more fair business. And one of those things that was recommended was a customer charge. It's a standard in the industry. It represents good business practices, meaning to be a customer, you need to pay X amount to be a customer. Pretty standard to cover those fixed operational costs that if you use no electricity, that's what it costs. Right now, the cost of a customer is $32 a month. It's what it costs us to have a customer that uses no electricity. The Municipal Light Board, we presented a recommendation to them, discussed it at length, not an easy decision at all, but we came to the conclusion that we needed to make some stride towards working towards that good business practice of having a customer charge. It was recommended, it was being used all over, and it's got it back to that customer that used zero electricity but cost us $32 a month, that someone else, their neighbor, had to make up for that, or someone had to make up that cost. We knew it would be a burden for those customers that didn't use it. Thus, the board didn't go with $32, went at a fraction of it, at just the $7. We did it, and also chose to do it at a time when the power purchase cost was going down slightly to minimize the effect on customers. So it was a good business practice to make things more equitable, distribute the rates in an equitable manner. It wasn't meant to try to increase people's rates, but just try to recover our costs in an equal way as possible.
Thanks.
Ted?
Just to revisit the point on electric vehicles. So, and if we're keeping our basically like 90% of our expected consumption fixed, how much does say 15% of the vehicles in Danvers are electric in 3 years? How much can you frame that consumption for me relative to the total consumption in the town right now?
Let me get back to you with that. I used to have those numbers if I was presenting on that. We had it. I just don't want to shoot from the hip on that one tonight. If I can hold back and get that answer.
And so then my next question would be, to the degree that there is this, obviously, absent being able to get solar for our entire energy consumption, power doesn't come from the sky. Right. And to the degree that we do have a spike in consumption for vehicle usage, how much incremental exposure would that drive into our rates on the spot market? So that would be my follow-up question.
We'd watch that spike coming, and we project our forecast for sales and how much we're going to need, a year out, and actually 5 years out. So we know 5 years from now approximately what we're going to need based on so many electric cars we think are gonna happen, a whole model's gone. So we would start working on acquiring new contracts long before that happened. Because we just wanna stay out of that spot market as much as we possibly can. And we have other companies, we work with a company called Energy New England, which is really good, their fingers right on the pulse of every public project out there. So we watch new plants and facilities to come online. In addition to that, we have Clint called bilateral contracts. What we have is a setup with a fixed contract on our boilerplate, and we did an invitation with number of power suppliers that said and we said to them from time to time, we're gonna go out for a power contract that we might have power for a year, 5 years, we can set the terms. And we can send that out to bid at any time. And we'll get 10 responses back and be able to take the best response. So we have that available to us. If we saw a tick up, we'd send out a request for some bilateral contracts, and we would probably get 10 proposals for people to supply that power to us at fixed rates. And when I say fixed rates, they change during the day and night. But we know what it's going to be. And the other thing we haven't talked about tonight is that electricity costs different amounts at different times of the day. At the peak times, it costs more. Middle of the night, it costs less. Right now, we're blending that all out for our customers. And you guys are having an average rate, even though behind the scenes, it cost us more for that power we bought at 6 tonight than it did at 2 in the morning. For example, when people have electric cars, we're going to try to get them all to charge them at night when the power is cheap. And we'll even give them an incentive because they'll be charging their car at night. We're getting 15 cents when it's only costing us 4 at night, but it costs us 20-something during the day. So time of use rates is the other coming attraction for the electric rates in the future.
And the footprint in the homes is already there for you to be able to do that?
I couldn't.
The metering technology is already there in the homes for you to be able to do that?
Correct. Yes, it is. Once we get the ones that don't work right fixed, yes.
That's
Another
it for me.
nerve.
I'm good, thank you.
Paul, you want to follow up?
Yeah, a couple of other issues. Is wind turbine are there any opportunities in town, or is that something that we wouldn't be able to take advantage of?
Yeah, we did a wind study, I think it was a dozen years ago. Really, there was no place that jumped out with wind even close that we needed. When we did the high school project, we wanted to do some little micro turbines at the high school.
Right.
And even that at the time, didn't work out. We'll keep an eye on technology and an eye on it, but every time we've tried to look at it here in town, it hasn't worked for us.
And lastly, for me, I know, and listening to the selectmen's presentation on March 13th, I think at the end, there was a discussion about how much the electric department would have to keep as a set aside to handle an emergency. And is that, could you, I didn't see it in here, I don't know if maybe I didn't look close enough, but what do we have set aside for emergency? In other words, knock on wood, whatever, there is some wood right here probably. We haven't had a hurricane hit this area in years. Big power outages, things along those lines, freezing lines. We don't see it. It's hard for me to see it in the last couple of years, but they're out there.
We had a serious storm in 2019 that we did have some significant.
Did we?
Yeah, issues with, and they did a great job.
Okay.
Help from Peabody and
Right.
Middleton.
But if we get one of these sort of, I guess, natural disasters, are we in a position to really handle it with the amount of money we're setting aside, or are we below what either does the Fed or the state require, or do they just recommend that we hold X amount of dollars, put X amount of dollars aside?
So right now, we have a rate stabilization fund that has approximately $15 million in it.
Right.
And we have our capital depreciation fund, which has approximately $5 million in it. Those are our two funds. Our efficiency audit that we had look at all of our operations in our books. We also asked them to tell us what kind of reserves are recommended for a business of our size, how big they should be, how should we restrict them. And we got a recommendation, we got a couple of recommendations from them. We've gone out and we're in the process of proposing and adopting a financial policy like the town has for how much should Danvers Electric keep in reserve. Is $15 million the right amount? Should it be 20? Should it be 10? And how much should be in our capital account? So we're in the process. We think we're in the ballpark. However, some reports say we're low, others say maybe we're a little too high, but we're working through that right now so that we can work with the municipal light board and the selectmen and establish financial policies for Danvers Electric.
As
So
a,
that there'll be
as
no
a famous
further-
person says, you're working on it, right?
Yes, Mr. Bradley, we're working on it.
Okay, excellent, thank
And we're
you.
not, it's true.
Could you just quickly, too, because it sort of goes in line with this, talk about the significant payment that we made towards the retirement? That we
Sure,
had?
so so Danvers Electric used to have more in reserves. We made 2 payments towards Danvers Electric's retirement liability, one of 5, then one of 3. At the time, the money, because we're restricted how we can invest our funds like we should be, those funds don't generate a lot of interest, where the retirement accounts over the long term show substantial increase. It shows substantial interest on those funds. So that we looked at a long-range projection. It was better for Danvers Electric and all the customers to pay off that retirement liability, thus not have that catch-up payment like the town has any longer, and that money can just go back to the customers if we're decreasing operational expenses. So we took money out of the bank to decrease operational expenses because we felt we could take that $8 million out of the bank and still have enough in reserve.
Any questions from the audience? Nova?
Nova Samade, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. So I understand that we have contracts with everyone, but if the renewable resource contracts are coming in at a favorable rate comparatively to like natural gas, or do they have the capacity for us to increase buying from them?
So we have people in the industry, and we're in the industry, so we get in at the ground floor. So that when a project's developed, and say they offer, say they were like, they're gonna build a plant, say in a town next to us in Beverly. If they were gonna build a plant, they do an offering saying who wants to get in on this. So we find out about it and we get in at the beginning. And what we do is put in a reservation saying, yeah, we would like to reserve our piece of that. And we group together with a group of about 12 different municipal electrics that we, as a group, go in on a lot of these big projects.
Oh, so we can't increase how much we get from them unless another town
Dropped out.
pulled it? Okay, gotcha. Thank you.
Correct.
Bill?
Bill Bradstreet, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1, and thank you for working on the solar setup at the landfill. I know you were working on it, thank you. As far as the unpaid power bills, isn't it like someone is stealing money from the town because we're not getting the money we're due? The other thing is, if this money is owed, can they put a lien on the property so someone is going to be, at some point in the future, to pay for what was being stolen? How long do you wait before you realize that the bills aren't being paid so that you can do something rather than, and I'm not faulting you, but at some point, the source of income to pay for the power just disappears in a poof. How long do you, I don't know, work with it until you, I mean, do you go to knock on the door and say, you're not paying your bills, power's being cut off, or how do you handle that?
On normal times, when it's the non-winter months, we do shut-offs. People get at 90 days behind, their power gets shut off. We cannot do shut-offs in the winter.
Okay.
Because of the COVID crisis, we have not been able to do shut-offs for the last year and a half. Because they changed the law, so we're not allowed to do that. So we haven't been able to use our shut-off tool as an impetus to get people to pay. Our business office does a yeoman's job, working with the customers, trying to get them to pay, sending follow-up letters, calls, all of that, to try to track this money down. They work very hard at it. And they also work very hard if someone has financial needs to send them to the resources where they can get financial assistance. We have some people in the business office that are really dedicated to the town, do a good job at that, trying to help people find a way to pay their electric bill. Just find a way to be part of it. Get us going so we get out of it. So for the last year, we haven't been able to do shut-offs. When there's rentals, if a person that just rents in town, we cannot lien the property for a rental. If you own the property and the meter's in your name, we can lien the property. It's the way the regulations are set up right now because most of the industry is done by private investor-owned utilities. So unfortunately, we cannot lien property for rentals if they don't pay.
Is this another law that has to be changed by the legislature in Boston? My point is, somebody owns the property. Someone is responsible. If someone rents their property or leases it, they still own the property. Aren't they still, or can't they still be held accountable? Again, or is that something that the legislature has to say, we'll help you out and change the law so that at some point, whether it's tomorrow or 10 years down the road, you will recoup the money that was, in essence, stolen?
So they're economically, they are responsible for the money. We'd have to go to small claims court to get the money. This is a very, very small fraction of all of our rental people. We pick up the majority of them with deposits. When you come down to sign up as a rental, you have to pay a deposit. The renters don't like paying a deposit. However, the deposit is there to cover us for that extra month at the end if they try to, it's like a last month's rent kind of thing. We have that. And when normal times, when we have the shut-off ability, that we're right there. We know it's rentals and we know they're not paying. Right on the day we can shut it off, it'll get shut off. And that takes care of the vast majority of them. They really have to work hard to slip through the cracks.
Again, I guess my question is it something the town or some communities can get together and have the people who are sitting in Boston getting paid do something to help us out?
So the last time we looked at it was to increase our deposit policy even more. That was one idea thrown out. So they had to put more money up front. However, now we had people that are trying to rent apartments, and now they have to come up with a giant deposit to get their electricity turned on. That was a burden. That was discussed, and we have increased the deposits in the past. That'll probably get talked about again. That was what was proposed as our tool in order to prevent that. So we have the customer's money in the bank as a reserve.
And I understand, I think, what you're talking about, but the town still needs money to operate. Somebody's got to pay it. If it's not yesterday, it's going to be 10 years down the road, but they need the money somehow, or at least a portion of it. It just looks, to me, to look into this over $60,000 in unpaid or uncollected money. I'd like to have $60,000. I'd like to think that the town would like to have the $60,000. Again, do we need help from someone, some entity, to help us here?
Bill, just to help you sleep well tonight,
And I'm going to need it.
the uncollected on the electric is a little over 0.1% of the budget. It's actually a better collection rate than the town has on the property tax. So they're doing a pretty good job.
You're working on it. All right,
I
thanks.
mean, you also have to understand that, quite honestly, Bill, this isn't a $10,000, a $15,000, and a $20,000. These are many, many $200, $300 bills. In order to collect those would probably cost us more than we would recoup back in getting them. And I understand the frustration with the fact that people get away with something, but in a $40 million a year business, it just doesn't make sense. It's a loss that we have. There's things that happen, It's the way business works sometimes. If you can't sleep, you can't sleep.
Increase the deposit then.
Yeah, I mean, no, we don't want to increase the deposit because these are our customers, and that can be a very difficult thing to be able to deal with on these folks with it. So it's not a simple question of increasing the deposit on it. It's been looked at. This is something that when we have our meetings every month, this is something that we talk about sometimes. And the fact of the matter is a policy decision that 0.1% is a loss that we in the business model can accept. Again, I appreciate the fact that people don't like that, and then someone gets away with something, but we're not going to spend $75,000 in order to be able to collect 60.
Okay, I don't like it.
I can appreciate it, you don't. Neither do I, but that's business.
Any other questions? Matt?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Matthew Duggan, Town Meeting Member, Precinct 1. I'm on page 66, planned program capital improvements, about half a dozen lines down, the Northland substation upgrade. You can see over a number of calendar years, it's several $1 million. Are we upgrading this due to capacity constraints through you, Mr. Chairman?
Sure. The Northland substation is the one I mentioned earlier, the one behind the Liberty Tree Mall. It's one of our main substations. It's being replaced due to its age.
Yeah. Okay, so I have an example of a project that may require an upgrade to a substation, and it's at 152 Endicott Street, the old Denny's. So right now, there's an application before the ZBA to build more than 200 dwelling units. Would that type of project trigger or require an upgrade for the Endicott Street substation, do you think?
So the Endicott Street station, there's some provisions there to provide enough power for even what's been proposed so far on the Denny's property. We do have some issues on the conductors getting to that. They're probably going to need bigger lines to get to the property. And some work has been done on the conduits underground, whether or not they can pull the bigger conduits in. So that's some work to still be done on that to see what we're going to have to do to supply that power.
Okay. And then just one last question. So would the developer be required to pay for those improvements for the feeder lines, or is that a cost that would be distributed over all ratepayers?
So if we're increasing our main line, such as like when the new Volk school went in, we did some improvements to our 23,000 volt line. We extended that out. Because we're extending our main line that was a benefit to the whole system, we paid for that piece. And then everything that was just there that we did for the project itself, they would pay for. So we try to follow that model, where if it's a system improvement, something that other customers could take advantage of, the whole system would pay for it. But if it's an improvement just for them, then they would pay for that piece.
Okay. So it would only be from the street to...
We're working on that right now to see if we're doing a study to see if we want to have bigger conductors on certain areas to connect, because there's a place in the mall we'd like to connect through with 1,000-watt cable to connect through. We might want to do that as part of our system, make one loop, which would shorten that. If we did that, if it was beneficial to us, it would shorten their run into their property.
Okay. All right, great. Thank you for that information. Appreciate it. Thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, as you all probably know, this is a warrant article, so we'll actually be voting on this in 2 weeks. And we can move on to capital.
So I think we actually brought up the slide. Matt's question was about the Northland substation, which is part of the electric capital improvement plan. So we might as well start with the electric capital, since it's already queued up.
Page?
66.
Page 66 in the budget.
Thank you.
So David or Clint, if you guys want to walk through the capital plan for electric, and then we can switch over to the tax side.
Sure. Top of the list is our financial management and work order system. Again, this was something that was picked out in our efficiency audit as far as how we do our business. And this is redoing our whole financial system down there, the software for it, right from our warehouse to our financial books that we keep up to how we're billing out projects in the field, all combined. So it'd be both the operational side and the business side. We have a team working on looking at different systems that people are using right now. It's way outdated, what we're doing, some of our procedures right now, so it's long overdue. It's going to be a big project, but it's something that we're looking forward to changing out our financial software and having a real package where we can have work orders that generate inventory for projects and standard bills for systems. It's something we're excited about doing for the electric division. The second one down is Station 42 on Bow Street. That's our main substation where all the power comes in. We're working on the design of the control house. We have a very outdated control house down there that needs to be done, so we're working on the design and some small improvements to that, which will lead to a bigger project. Same thing with Northland Substation, the one we talked about a couple times on Constitution Lane behind the mall. Essentially, we're working with the mall with a property swap, so we're going to be able to build a new substation beside the old one, keep that one in service, build a new one beside it, then we'll dismantle that one and turn that into a parking lot. The 23,000 and 5,000 volt upgrades, that's changing cable out around town. We have cable that's bare, cable that's old, bundled cable, and putting the new cable in that both is more efficient and it's can withstand weather and trees better. The next one is the residential meter change out, $70,000. That's the process that we're going to undertake. We have all the meters in stock. For the ones that are not working correctly, we need to get out there and replace those meters. We did start the program. We put it on hold when we went to the COVID crisis, when everybody was working at home and getting homeschooled. Now we're gearing up this spring. Now that most of the kids are back in school, more people are are back to work, or people have adapted to working at home. We're going to start the program back up this spring. We will be able to notify people when we're on your street, when we're there. We'll bang on the door and say we're going to have a momentary outage. It'd just be a plug and play, pull your meter out, put the new one in. Landfill and Smith solar projects, $125,000 here. That's mostly for the permitting and design of those projects, not construction. And at the landfill, not only do we have to permit putting a solar array on top of the landfill, we have to permit the filling of the landfill with the clean dirt. So we're putting clean dirt on top of our capping that off, then put a solar, which is, because of our type of landfill, it's out of the ordinary for the DEP. So it's quite a process. Various upgrades and maintenance items, that's replacing the transformers that are older. We talked about a couple outages due to transformers, switch gear, all of the parts and pieces around the system. We have $600,000 in rolling stock replacements. Primarily that is a couple of bucket trucks. And so that's a snapshot of our capital program. We do have our capital program projected out 5 years. I believe that's a page in your budget book, which you can show the big expenses we have are right there. The Northland substation is shown as far as that's a multi-million-dollar project. As long as Station 42 is also quite a project coming in the next few years. And then we can take any questions you have on that whole budget page on page 66. That whole sheet. Ted?
The power here is hands down the most reliable I've ever had in many of the cities I've lived, so keep doing what you're doing. That's it.
Thank you.
Mike, you're
No.
Oh.
No, but thank you for a very good report. Appreciate it. Very thorough.
Mike?
All set.
Eric?
2 questions on the Northland substation. You said it's a multi-million-dollar project. Obviously, it's $300,000 here. How much of the project is complete? Is it, I think you said it would be over a period of years, right?
Altogether, it's estimated to be a $6 million project.
And as it phases in, is it at the end of 6 years, everything swapped out, or is it going to be just modular? Like this piece is done, then there's a swap out, then?
If you look, we're going to be like $1.5 million 1 year, then 2, then 3. It's going to be like a 3-year project. So, so we're going to have to, we still have some work to do on the finances of that, whether or not this is a project we should bond or
Sure.
carry it out of cash, out of depreciation like we're doing. We're going to have to do some work on that. We've done it both ways in the past.
And you said this is the one, Constitution, behind the north,
Correct.
behind the mall, right next to the Verizon?
Yes, yep, right next to Verizon.
So then my question is, where is it going to end up? Because that has got to be the worst intersection in all of the Northeast for visibility.
So if you turn right onto Constitution and the substation is on your right and the mall's on your left, keep driving past it. It's going to go on the right-hand same side of the road, just past it, right in that little wooden area. So if
Okay.
you're looking at the substation from the road, it's going to go on the left, right next on the left of it.
Okay,
They've been working on an easement to correct that issue.
thank you.
Yeah.
All set.
Sally?
I have no questions, thank you.
Great. Thank you.
I think you stole our clicker.
No wonder I got
Clicker, give it back.
He liked using the laser, so he was hoping to walk out, yeah. So before handing it back to David, just, I'll provide a real high-level overview of kind of where we are, where we're going. So this slide really just shows, each year, the requests, and these requests are all based on long-term plans. We have a pavement management plan, we have a stormwater system plan, we have plans for roofs, we have plans for everything. And, we try to keep up with the capital needs, the infrastructure needs, because the longer we wait, the more expensive they get. And what you can see in the middle column here on the screen, we had close to $7 million in capital requests this year from the various departments that are charged with maintaining these systems. And we are able, this year, we are proposing to complete just a little under $3.5 million worth of capital improvements. We talked a little bit last night about ARPA, the American Recovery Plan Act. Mr. Duggan asked a question about the $8 million that has been identified on paper as available to the town. We know that infrastructure is one of the key components of that. There's also an infrastructure bill being discussed separate from that in DC. So certainly there's work to be done, and I think part of the discussion moving forward with the select board and this board will be how do we utilize those resources to either catch up or get ahead on some of these capital needs, which will pay dividends into the future. So before we get into this year's proposed spending, I wanted to spend just a second talking about kind of that snapshot. But there's certainly more work to be done each year that we have the resources to do for all the systems that we maintain.
Ready?
Go ahead,
So
Dave, thank you.
The sheet here represents the replacements for the rolling stock in DPW this year, based on the vehicle replacement schedule and a current inspection of all of our vehicles. Obviously, the biggest item is to replace one of our 8 sand trucks. This is for the dump truck and the plow. We'll take the existing sander and put it in the truck. So we're getting at least 2 trucks out of every sander now, which is good news. Below that is 2 pickup trucks with plows. We have 4 mowers to replace. We have a message board. That's one of our signage boards that you see, like the one in the square right now. We have it loaned out to the flagpole. And this is actually 1/3 of the cost. Those actually cost, it's $45,000, and we're splitting it up as it gets used, 1/3 tax supported, 1/3 water, 1/3 sewer. And then at the end, a request that just made the list was a 22-foot trailer. That's for the sidewalk paver that the town approved. The sidewalk paver worked out great. The crew liked it. They were very efficient with it. However, we need the proper trailer for it. So we're not trying to jockey it up onto a trailer that's not built for it. It's not safe. It doesn't work. So for the work that we get out of it, this is a modest request to make that crew more efficient. The next slide, now we go into the replacement for the general fund, where I get to talk about body armor for the police and the police.
Well, we talked about that last night, so you're not
All
on the
set?
spot to explain that.
All
Yep.
right.
Yeah, we did go through that last night.
Good, because that's all I know.
Same with, we didn't talk about the radios, we did talk about the fire prevention vehicle, but we've replaced all of the handheld radios for the fire department in the last 2 years. The department actually was successful in obtaining a grant to replace part of their radios, and one of the budget transfers we will be talking about on the 26th is $12,500 that was required as a match to obtain that grant to replace the first batch of these radios. So the number you see here, 123, is considerably less than it would have been otherwise. had Chief Emerald and his staff not been successful in obtaining that grant. Recreation tractor, Dave.
So that recreation tractor is the tractor down at Endicott Park. So Endicott Park has one small tractor down there. They've been borrowing our old farm tractor and using it for everything under the world that it was not designed for down there. So looked at their needs and the maintenance they do on their property. So the maintenance park ranger staff, they do a lot of maintenance and work down there taking care of that farm and that property. It alleviates a lot of work for DPW. We really don't have to go down there when there's like a big project to do or work out of the ordinary. So it was recommended to purchase a second tractor for Endicott Park at the cost of $46,000. And this has various attachments, front-end loaders, equipment that goes on the back. And it can also hook onto their existing equipment, which they own.
Mr. Chairman, there is a vote tonight on the...
On the 852.
On the 852.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, so tonight we'll be voting on the 852, 735 as part of the operating budget. And I think that's our last vote of the evening, correct?
That's right.
Okay. Sally?
Thank you. I'm having a hard time following this presentation with what's in our budget book. So for instance, it says budget page 103, but budget page 103 to me is a 5-year plan, and it's hard to isolate out the things that are up here. And I had thought we were going to be going through it more by looking at page 92, 93, 94, et cetera, going through it that way. So I'm just wondering if there's some easy way for me to get to that 852, if you can guide me through the budget book to find it.
Page 94.
So page 94 spells a little bit, but to your point, I do think that, again, the capital plan that we put in the operating budget is a work in progress. And I think we appreciate the feedback on trying to develop a better way to show it. So in the capital plan document of the budget, as you notice, we split out the capital outlay between vehicles and equipment, and then we have sewer and water capital outlay as well. So to your point, it is a little bit confusing.
It's just hard to think of how to present it, and
Yeah.
just the way it's been presented is different than what I was expecting, so I'm having a hard time following it. But, I mean, I recognize, like the other night, we were talking about the police vehicles and the body armor, and I can flip through and find that. It's just hard for me quickly now to get to that 852.
I think page 94 is probably the closest, but that includes some utility capital as well. So it's organized, in the capital plan, it's organized by type.
And by the capital plan, you're meaning page 103?
I think 94 is a better page for this particular slide. You'll see the public works vehicles as well as the public safety vehicles and the message boards and the radios. But what's included in there is the utility funded pieces as well.
So on page 94, I see capital outlay vehicles of 746,985, capital outlay equipment 286,750. Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah, so if you backed out the sewer, the water, and 2/3 of the message board, you would get to the 852.
Okay. Now,
I think one of the things, Sally, just to Ronnie's point, we'll make sure next year that the slide is reflective of what's in, we'll make sure that the slides mirror what's in the book so that it's easier to follow along.
And, I mean, I think this is the only time I've had this snag of not being able to put my finger on it, but I appreciate it. Thank you. That pretty much solved it. So for right now, we're just talking about capital outlay, vehicles and equipment.
Correct.
And not including the stuff that's in from the sewer budget. And as you say, message board is divvied up.
Yes, correct.
And not including the water budget.
Correct.
Okay.
The earlier votes on the water and sewer budget captured these expenses, which are presented here.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, if I could, I think technically we're voting on page 22, is that correct?
On
In
the
terms of
table
the
of
appropriation
appropriations.
table, correct, yeah.
Yes, the capital outlay budget on page 22 is, reflects that number. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike, for pointing that out.
Sally, are you all set? Or did you
I
have-
am, thank you.
Okay. Eric?
Thank you. One quick question. Just in a general sense, how are the vehicles maintained? Do we have a garage that maintains our vehicles so that they make it to their useful life?
Yes, we do. Yeah, so we have a foreman with 4 mechanics, and we'll do the DPWs, recreation, all the town hall vehicles. We do all the police cars. We do everything except for the fire trucks.
Thank you.
Mike?
No, I agree with Sally. You used to put capital outlay within each budget, then we look in the back of the book under fire, police, or DPW, and we could see each vehicle under that particular, under particular department. I don't understand why you had to do this here.
So a couple of reasons. I think splitting out the capital separate from the operating budget is necessary so that it doesn't show too many spikes, peaks and valleys in the actual operating budgets. But to your point, we should, if we're going to bring the capital outlay into one page, make it a clear depiction in the budget book.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Paul?
I'm all set, thank you.
Mike?
No, I'm good.
Ted?
Just to piggyback on Eric's question, your maintenance, does that also includes like taking care of $46,000 tractors?
Yes, it does.
Yeah, I was gonna ask that question.
Yep.
And what's the useful life on something like that?
So on the tractors, we're getting 12 years out of the tractors.
Okay.
Yeah, that's an average, sometimes more, sometimes less, but we're looking for 12.
That's it for me, thank you.
Any questions from the audience? Is there a motion?
Move the budget.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Great, thank you. Mr. Town Manager, Mr. Finance Director, and staff, thank you very much for a excellent presentation these past couple of nights. Also want to thank the staff here at the Holton Richmond and the DCAT staff for their work in making sure we were comfortable and viewable and all the rest of it, and thank you. So if there's a motion to adjourn?
Motion to, second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Have a great night, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.